Chapter 26, Chapter 026 Mission Impossible. Luke took all the members of the Howling Commandos from the East Coast, through the Atlantic Ocean. They crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, and entered the territorial waters of Italy. Because Spain was a neutral country during World War II, and there was a British naval base stationed nearby, they didn't face any trouble till that point. After a long, bumpy ocean journey and several routine identity checks along the way, Luke and the others arrived in Sicily and were about to disembark in Palermo. The members of Howling Commandos couldn't believe it. They arrived without any hitches, right under the nose of the Axis. Dum Duggan couldn't help but sigh, saying, "This is the most thrilling thing I've ever done in my life." The others agreed, like lions walking into a wolf's den. Even if the individual's strength was strong, as long as their identity is exposed, they would be eaten by the wolves. Maybe, when the time came, their captain Luke might be able to escape by himself with his strength. But they were destined to fall under the Nazi guns. "We have arrived at our destination, someone will meet us later. They will make arrangements for our hideout." Luke spread out a map of Sicily in front of him and said, "I will repeat the plan. I am now Vito Corleone, a Sicilian who left his homeland at an early age, and now I am returning as a smuggler, and a merchant who sells goods between the Allies and the Axis powers. But this is just a cover to deal with the Axis Navy. I personally captured a Hydra assassin in Brooklyn, named Greg Nissen, and the Strategic Science Reserve got a lot of information from him. So, now that we have arrived in Sicily, we are going to meet an SSR informant. My identity to the Axis soldiers, while on the way, will be that of a secret envoy from Berlin to give orders to Mussolini from the Führer." The British had cracked the enigma, and radio communication had become an reliable way of transmitting secret information, so disguising ourselves as a secret envoy from Berlin with the knowledge of the secret information would not arouse any suspicion. Editor note: for those who are unfamiliar with the Enigma code, I would recommend watching the movie, The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch as the ML. The movie is fantastic. Our mission is to go to Rome and kill Mussolini. Dum Duggan's eyes widened. He wondered if he had heard wrong. This task was too crazy. If it wasn't for the fact that Luke's reliability and calmness had been recognized by his teammates, he would have thought they were joking. No, it's not that exaggerated. Mussolini's government is just a puppet. He himself was relieved of all powers by the King of Italy and imprisoned in Pontia Island, and was later rescued by Hitler's men. Seeing Luke shake his head and vetoed, the members of Howling Commandos were relieved. At this time in Sicily, there were 2 German armored divisions. If they made any trouble, they would definitely be shot dead. As for the assassination of Mussolini, it was even more impossible. Only God knew how much security there was around the dictator. Our mission is to enter Rome, capture Mussolini alive, and assist the Allied forces to land in Sicily. Become the first team to conquer Italy. Luke finally revealed the main objective. For the next few minutes, the entire cabin fell into dead silence. Everyone's mouth was wide open with a dumbfounded expression. Did I hear it wrong, or is this guy joking? "Sir, are you serious?" Dum Duggan hesitantly asked. He found that the young captain could always give his teammates surprises. Kidnapping a government leader with just a few people and getting away with it, not only did it sound implausible, it is no different than suicide. Luke propped his hands on the table, leaning forward, his tall figure exuding an oppressive atmosphere. The members who wanted to express their opinions subconsciously reduced their voices and shut their mouths. But the actual situation isn't so bad. First of all, Our opponents are the Italians, so I don't think I need to say anything about this country's military capabilities. The American newspapers said, if Italy stayed neutral, the Germans would have to increase their forces by 5 divisions. If Italy joined the Allies, they would have to add 10 divisions to their army. But when Italy joined the Axis, the Germans had no other choice but to send 20 divisions to protect them. Luke used a humorous tone to ease the atmosphere a little. Compared with the French who raised the white flag in 40 days, the Italians aren't much better. You certainly don't know that the British Army led 25 people in World War I, fought against 10,000 Italian troops, and captured 8,000 people. In fact, in terms of war, they can't even win against Ethiopia. Luke's tone was impassioned, and his eyes flashed slightly. Truthfully, most of the stories he said were just rumors in his previous life, and their authenticity needed to be verified. Comment. 49 comments. Vote. Chapter 27, Chapter 027 Don Casa. Truthfully, most of the stories he said were just rumors in his previous life, and their authenticity needed to be verified. For example, the Ethiopians of World War II weren't the primitive natives that many nations thought they were. In fact, their army was known as the Lions of East Africa and was quite strong. If it weren't for the subsequent use of poison gas warfare by Italy in the second invasion, it wouldn't be possible to take over Ethiopia, and maybe the history would have repeated itself, and Italy would have suffered another defeat. As for the Italian military, it wasn't that miserable. Although it did become the butt of jokes, its military strength wasn't that weak, and it also performed well in World War II. For example, in the Second Battle of El Alamein, the 185th Folgore paratroopers blocked the British armoured offensive with burning bottles, anti-tank guns, mines and explosives under the absolute disadvantage of 113 troops and 1:70 armour. Editor's note: let's not go deeper into the exact facts. This is fanfic. All in all, what Luke said before was to boost the Howling Commandos' morale and ease the fear of the members. Maybe he could raid Rome by himself and capture Mussolini alive, but he can't finish the task of assisting the Allied forces to land in Sicily alone. But what we have to face isn't only the Italian army, but also the Germans. Duggan was a little shaken by this mission, even though Luke's speech was quite compelling. At least, the members of Howling Commandos now believed that the Italian army was vulnerable, and it seems that it wasn't so difficult to advance into Rome. The Allies will take care of it for us, Luke firmly answered. He agreed to follow Colonel Philip's plan, not because he was hot-headed, but after careful consideration. According to the original timeline of World War II, the Allies had already finished the campaign in North Africa. The next step was to counterattack Italy, opening up a new battlefield. In July, the Allied landing forces will set sail in the ports on the east coast of North Africa, the Mediterranean Sea, as well as Iran and Algiers. Then, the army led by General Patton went straight to Sicily. And right now, it isn't too far from the fall of Mussolini's government and the surrender of Italy. Perhaps it seemed to others that it would be an impossible task to raid Rome and capture the leader alive. But Luke was confident because he was standing on the rumbling wheels of history, rolling forward. How much reputation can I gain by becoming a conqueror of Italy? Luke couldn't help thinking. Spreading his own name all over the world. As a reputation-grinding method, it was almost like cheating. This was something he couldn't do in the game. At your command, sir. After a long while, Duggan gritted his teeth and made a decision. Anyway, he arrived in Sicily, surrounded by enemies. There were 2 roads in front of them. either to complete the mission and return home with honor, or choose desertion and appear before a court-martial. When Duggan, the leader, said this, the rest of the team didn't hesitate anymore. Sicily is located in the south of Italy, across the Strait of Messina from the Apennines in the northeast, and occupies an important position in the commercial trade routes of the Mediterranean. Therefore, when Luke came ashore from Palermo, he thought he would encounter a rather strict interrogation. To his own surprise, Luke, who was currently disguised as a smuggler, Vito Corleone, easily bribed the officers here with only 20 cases of cigarettes, some ham and bread, and was able to easily get through. It can be seen from this what later generations had said: the whole Italian military was corrupt from top to bottom during World War II. It wasn't without reason. After landing, Luke saw several tall men with caps and tattoos on their arms on the port wharf, secretly looking at his group. He walked over with a kind face and spoke fluent Italian. "Do you know where the Bronze Bell Tavern is?" The Superman card brought benefits beyond just physical strengthening. When it came to academic talent and planning skills, Luke had improved significantly. Superman, who came to the studio next door, may not be inferior to Batman, who was called world's greatest detective, when he really used his brain. However, perhaps it was because of Batman that Superman was too lazy to think. Luke smiled, and shook off these frivolous thoughts as he started to chat with these tall men. After a brief refresher course on Italian prior to his trip, he was now able to speak the local language with a slight Sicilian regional accent. This was also one of the reasons why the Howling Commandos was able to get past the patrolling warships several times along the way. Soon those people were convinced of his Vito Corleone identity. Even though Luke told Dum Dum Duggan that he grew up in Brooklyn, the latter got a bit skeptical, believing that the young captain was most likely from Sicily. "Mr. Corleone." The man in the lead frowned and asked. "You can call me Vito," Luke said indifferently. Hearing the secret code line, these men dressed in similar clothes quickly changed their attitudes and became respectful. "Mr. Corleone, Don Carcer is waiting for you in the Bronze Bell Tavern. The car is ahead." Then, he waved and 3 black cars drove up in front of the pier entrance. The man opened the door and waited for Luke to sit inside. The Don Carcer, as they called him, was the informant for the Strategic Science Reserve. Comment. 93 comments. Vote. Chapter 28, Chapter 028 Meeting. As they got in the car, Luke gestured to the Howling Commandos to keep up their vigilance. Soon, the motorcade raised a bit of dust and headed for the Bronze Bell Tavern. Carcer Alessandro, the only remaining mafia leader in Sicily. The mafia, which was famous in later years, and even world-renowned, didn't have it easy at this time. In 1925, after Mussolini gained absolute control over Italy, he made a famous national speech on the mafia. Through the loudspeakers, he vowed to all Italians to purify the social air, crack down on crime and to eliminate evil. To eradicate the mafia, the cancer, from Italy. No one expected that Mussolini would actually do what he said he would do and start a serious raid on the mafia. Openly, his dictatorship commanded the military and police to arrest nearly 1,000 mafia members. However, in truth, he directly bombed their hideouts. Once captured, they didn't even get a basic trial. A full-scale bloodbath was directly unleashed. In Sicily's Fountain Square, people were executed every day. Blood seeped into every floor tile and land. As a result, the mafias died or fled, either by being arrested and imprisoned or by fleeing overseas. By now, Sicily was a clean slate free of sinister powers. People were no longer worried of the gangsters' harassments, but had to endure the dictator's reign of terror. However, it was worth mentioning that the mafia, which had been weakened in Italy, re-emerged from America and had regained its vitality. For the future Hollywood gangster films, it created a large number of inexhaustible character material. Luke, who had come into contact with the Irish mob and dealt with Italian mafia, knew this very well. Seeing the poor living environment in Sicily and holding a grudge against Mussolini, many mafia families secretly aligned themselves with the Allied powers. This was the case with Casa Alessandro, who had now become an informant for the Strategic Science Reserve. 30 minutes later, the car stopped at the door of the Bronze Bell Tavern. Several burly men with tattoos stood at the door. Luke was stopped after he got out of the car. "Mr. Alessandro, you want me to go inside alone? You guys don't seem sincere." The leader of the group looked a bit puzzled, and after a moment of silence, he said, "The situation in Sicily is very tense, Mr. Corleone, please understand." "Well, you can bring an attendant. Don Casa is very careful, this is also for his safety. Since you're being so polite, I don't have any complaints." Luke took off his black woolen coat and handed it to Mainelli behind him, signaling that he was unarmed. Then, he reached out and beckoned Dum Dum Dugan to follow him. "You stay where you are and wait for me to come out," Luke ordered. Mainelli nodded, holding the coat in one hand and carrying a suitcase in the other. There was a submachine gun hidden inside. He was sure that if the mafia dared to play dirty, he and his team could turn the Bronze Bell Tavern upside down. Luke walked into the tavern, which was now a mafia hideout. The thick round tables were full of family members. Most of them were young and strong thugs, who belonged to the Legion and were responsible for engaging in violence, fighting over or guarding territory. Being closely watched by over 30 strong men, who were also rumored to be one of the most ferocious mafia, the average person would be weak in the legs, unable to walk. But Luke was calm and steady, and his temperament didn't diminish. "Mr. Corleone, we welcome your arrival." The bearded man, at the center of it all, got up and greeted him. He was Casa Alessandro, the former head of the mafia's Camorra family, now just a thug. When the mafia was purged, every family suffered heavy losses, and even the head of the family was put to death in public. Such iron-fisted means and ruthless behavior greatly shook the mafia. The special background, the special opportunity, in turn, gave Casa a chance to make a name for himself. He had gathered a group of people around him under the name of the Camorra family and recruited a lot of good people while the storm was brewing. "I guess since you were willing to see me, you know why we are here for, right?" Luke leaned back in his chair with a relaxed and calm tone. Casa was not only an informant for the Strategic Science Reserve, but also a mole for the future Allied landing in Sicily. In the original history, the American Intelligence Department chose the local mafia leader, Salvatore Lucania, nicknamed Lucky Luciano. He was a big shot in the New York underworld and was quite established. On the Italian side, it should have been Don Carlo, but now there was a slight change. The Sicilian mafia did play a significant role in the landings. They provided all kinds of support toward the Allies, delivered messages, handed out leaflets to persuade surrender and so on. Therefore, after the war, Don Carlo became the mayor of Villalba, while Salvatore Luciano was spared from prison and his wealth and reputation grew. Luke didn't mind giving this opportunity to Casa Alessandro, who is sitting opposite him. "I understand." "Yes, sir. I am ready and waiting for instructions from the Allies." Alessandro smiled pleasantly. 20 trained gunmen, I've got them ready. It's just that with so many people sneaking into Rome, it's a little hard to get passes, the time is too short." Seeing Alessandro's embarrassed expression, Luke expressionlessly said, "That's your problem, Casa. If you can't do it, then I'll find someone else. I heard about Don Carlo, who was thrown into prison by Mussolini, and he was a delight. That stronzo Don Carlo is nothing. Sicily is now Don Casa's, even the governor of Palermo." Comment. 33 comments. Vote. Chapter 29, Chapter 029. Bring me his hand. That stronzo Don Carlo is nothing. Sicily is now Don Casa's, even the governor of Palermo. Before Alessandro could finish his words, the young man standing behind him stepped forward, seemingly uncomfortable with Luke's disdain for his own boss. Luke narrowed his eyes and looked up. The other person's appearance was quite similar to Alessandro's. "He may be a family member related by blood. You have some good people." Luke was worried about the lack of an excuse to put down the mafia leader and test his determination to cooperate with the Allies. But now he got a chance to make a scene. "Elio. Shut up." When Alessandro heard his nephew say such things, he rushed to slap him across the face. The young man in front of him wasn't someone he could afford to offend. Mussolini had taught the mafia a lesson. No matter how powerful the mafia was, there was no room for resistance against the state apparatus. This young man, who called himself Vito Corleone, represented the American military and is an ally. Once they anger the other party, they won't end up any better than if they provoked Mussolini. Boom. However, when Alessandro had just touched his nephew's face at that slap, a sound echoed in the Bronze Bell Tavern. No one saw exactly when Luke got up and how he pinned the young man named Elio on the table. The blood flowed down from his forehead as if his skull was cracked, and dripped to the ground. Cough cough. "Don Casa. Uncle." Elio felt his head was crushed like a watermelon, and it could explode completely in the next moment. He didn't know the terrible strength the young man had. Where did it come from? 5 fingers and a palm came together like iron pinchers, pressing tightly on the back of his head. The excruciating pain, and the fear of death, made Elio's resolve instantly collapse. His tears flowed along with the blood and covered his whole face. "Casa, tell me, what does the mafia do to people who don't respect the alliance between two families?" Luke slowly sat back in his seat, ignoring the tense atmosphere and completely treating the group of people behind him as air. As the only remaining mafia leader in Sicily, even the police officers are reluctant to mess with the ruthless man. Alessandro had a great deal of prestige and authority within his family and in Palermo. His status and power were increasing with each passing day. When ordinary people see him, they must address him as Sir to show their respect. And other heads of the family, either brought in, or suppressed. Gradually, every meeting turned out to be a meeting where Alessandro expressed his personal opinion and allocated their interests and turf. Although the mafia wasn't as good as it used to be, they always had to worry about whether Mussolini would come for the purge again and had to be on the run. But Alessandro, who had taken advantage of this power struggle to rise to the top, gradually made them stronger in his hands. This was a fact that didn't need to be questioned. Therefore, the SSR took a fancy to him and he, seeing a chance, became an informant. However, Alessandro, who was regarded as Don by people and worshipped by many members, showed a trace of fear on his face, when he heard Luke's indifferent tone. Having experienced Mussolini's Great Purge, he had a strong psychological shadow about the military, which was essentially a powerful institution. If he offended this young captain, he would lose support of the Allied forces. Sooner or later, after the war, he would be targeted by the purge. Even if he switched to Mussolini's side, according to the dictator's temper, he was afraid it wouldn't end well. Thinking to this point, Alessandro's hands trembled slightly. On his chubby face, a touch of ruthlessness rose. "Mr. Corleone, I apologize to you for Elio's disrespect." He placed his palm on the table, and with a swish, drew a dagger from behind his waist and sliced down viciously. "Ah! Ah!" The screams of pain echoed in the Bronze Bell Tavern. A thick radish-like finger tumbled on the table. Large beads of sweat seeped out from his forehead, rolling down his nose, and slowly dripping. Alessandro gasped and said, "Mr. Corleone, are you satisfied?" Luke loosened the palm on Elio's head. Deadpan, he slowly shook his head. "I didn't tell you to make amends. Casa, I wanted you to explain how the Mafia treats people who don't respect their alliance. Mr. Corleone, don't you understand? Casa, please tell me, how much does your Mafia value the friendships with us?" Luke's voice remained cold, but it brought heavy pressure to Alessandro. He knew that the young captain was not an amateur that could be fooled. The bloody practice of cutting off one's finger off is a common way for the Mafia to ask for mercy, but it failed to impress the other party. Alessandro glanced at Elio, who was pale with fear, and sighed inside. "Carmelo. Drag Elio down and bring me his hand." Comment. 31 comments. Vote. Chapter 30. Chapter 030 Beat them into submission and then give them a treat. Being able to seize the opportunity and become the top leader of the Camorra family, Alessandro had guts. Although Elio was his nephew, he would still give him up in order to calm Luke's anger. Who told him to be too stupid? Just like the former Mafia members, they thought that they were the real masters of Italy. For example, Francisco Cacca, who triggered the end of the Mafia, is such a fool. He was both the mayor of Piana di Grigio and a major player in the local Mafia. When he greeted Mussolini, who was the great leader at the time, he asked him in a rather arrogant tone, why he had to bring so many police officers. Because, Cacca felt that no one could pose a threat to him on his own turf, with the protection of the Mafia. This almost rude attitude annoyed Mussolini, who was already very powerful at that time. A few months later, the dictator summoned 4,000 special forces and 6,000 police officers and launched a heavy-handed campaign to eliminate the Mafia. As for Cacca, he was arrested and imprisoned for insulting the Fara, contempt of law, and rebelling against the government. Alessandro, who has had the horrible experience of being wanted, and almost executed, wouldn't make the same mistake as that fool Cacca. Mr. Corleone, you will forever be a friend of the Mafia. Anyone who disrespects you, is disrespecting me and disrespecting the Camorra family. In less than a minute, the man named Carmelo presented a hand, placed on a tray. Are you satisfied with this explanation? If this isn't enough, I'll have Elio sent to the slaughterhouse later. Seeing Alessandro's trepidation and almost groveling, Luke's cold expression suddenly beamed with a smile. He knew the Mafia were contemptuous and only with a severe threat would they show respect. Thus he acted in such a way. Luke then picked up the glass on the table and said, "Come. A toast to our friendship." The smile was mild and friendly, without any sign of the previous aggression. His ability to change his face so suddenly surprised Dum Dum Dugan behind him, and thought, the captain is a scary man. The vicious Mafia was like a docile sheep before him. Alessandro smiled at the smell of blood and drained his glass of red wine. Get things done as soon as possible, and the Allies will never forget your efforts. Before leaving the pub, Luke patted Alessandro on the shoulder and added, your compatriots are doing well in North America and New York. They go in and out of high-end hotels with members of parliament, and hug Hollywood actresses. Casa, I admire you very much. You deserve a chance. Mr. Corleone, I will remember this personal friendship. Alessandro paused and then he moved. He bent down slightly, lowered his head and waited for Luke to hold out his left hand. This was the highest etiquette from the Mafia, to show respect. Often, only the Godfather could get the kiss from a Don. No need. I have seen your respect and attitude. Luke's mouth twitched. He didn't have the habit of letting men kiss the back of his hand. Out of the Bronze Bell Tavern, the Howling Commandos got into their cars and went to check into one of Palermo's top hotels. On the way, Duggan, who was sitting next to him, had an awkward expression. Do you want to ask why I should treat Alessandro with such an attitude? Luke opened his closed eyes. Sitting in the front passenger seat, was Mainelli, no outsiders. So, he didn't hide it. He said, Duggan, you don't understand the gangster mindset. Although the Italian Mafia has always used family honor and blood ties as a means to guarantee loyalty. But that doesn't mean they're actually a bunch of honorable criminals. Duggan nodded thoughtfully. He remembered that Luke seemed to have close ties with the Irish mob. When you want to tame a vicious dog, you have to beat it with a wooden stick until it's afraid to show you its fangs again. The same is true of the Mafia. Luke looked at the pedestrians in Palermo through the window and smiled, and human nature is a very complicated thing. Casa definitely had a grudge against me when his men brought that guy's severed hand. But because of my status, and the fact that allies have won successive battles, he was afraid to show it. But when I told him that I would support him as the voice of the Allies in Sicily, and he would be richly rewarded after the war, Casa's heart immediately felt grateful, with only a few unpleasant emotions left behind. When you use harsh methods, establish unquestionable authority, and then give them a small reward, they will be grateful to you. That's the typical gangster mentality. Comment. 45 comments. Vote. Chapter 31, Chapter 031. The Plan. The hotel where Luke and his party stayed was an important picturesque spot in a hilltop town, Taormina, on the east coast of Sicily. The climate here was spring all the year round, with beautiful scenery. There was a cliff on one side and the sea on the other. Like stones, urban buildings were piled up on the stepped peaks of the mountain. Luke had to agree, Alessandro is really good at what he does. Or, to describe it more accurately, Alessandro knew how to please his superiors. Luke came to the hotel called Walkiria and learned that Alessandro had already reserved an entire third floor for him and his entourage. Moreover, there were few reasons why he chose this small hotel with little reputation. On one hand, because there were few guests, it wouldn't be too eye-catching. On the other hand, the Walkiria was located at the top of the small town in Taormina. If you stay in a room on the third floor, one only needs to open the window to overlook the whole town, feel the moist sea breeze, and hear the sound of the waves, making them feel inner tranquility. Many people liked this feeling, Luke is no exception. According to the plan, he needed Alessandro to recruit 20 well-trained gunmen and get a pass to enter Rome. After calculating the time, Luke may stay in Taormina for 4 to 5 days. It was a good thing to have comfortable accommodation and environment. Luke and the team chose their own rooms. As a precaution, It would have been Dum Dum Dugan, or Dino Mainelli, in the same room as the captain. This can play a preventive role, but also facilitate dealing with possible unexpected situations. It's just that, after seeing Luke's great strength, members of the Howling Commandos had said that they were the ones who needed to be protected. Therefore, the two rooms next to Luke became the hot items in the team. In the end, Dum Dum Dugan and Mainelli, the two veterans, received the benefit of being protected by the Super Soldier. In the next few days, Dugan and Mainelli will take turns watching Alessandro. Although he looks like a wise man, we should also prevent him from making any stupid mistakes. In Luke's room, the members of Howling Commandos gathered to make plans for their next move. In addition to Luke, who was their captain, there were 5 other people in this team dispatched by the SSR. Dum Dum Dugan, as a front-runner, was the most distinguished man in the team. Dino Mainelli, who is always taciturn and quiet, is a scout and an infiltration specialist. The following team members were, respectively, the sniper Jimmy, called the Wild West, a marksman with 100% hit rate. Jeff, in charge of the surprise attacks, and Kenneth, who was a gunner and experienced driver. Dugan and I will be posing as Berlin's secret emissary, with letters and necessary props to verify our identities. The Allies did capture a Berlin secret emissary 2 weeks ago, thanks to reliable information the SSR extracted from the Hydra assassin. Luke spreads out a map of Rome, with a clear layout of the troops on it. The rest of you will arrive in Rome with Alessandro's team of gunmen, and on the day of the operation, Jimmy, you will take the high ground, that's the spot. Jeff and Kenneth will lead the gun team and create chaos in Venice Square. The chief officer guarding Sicily is Italian General Guzzoni. He has 11 local divisions and 2 German armored divisions. During this time, the Allies will carry out irregular bombing, and drive the fleet into the Strait of Tunisia, taking Pantelleria as a stronghold, creating the illusion of landing soon, and restraining Guzzoni's attention. Our task is to break into Venice Palace. It will take less than 24 hours to coerce Mussolini as a hostage, and I believe the King of Italy will issue a proclamation to depose the Prime Minister. Anyone with foresight can see that the Axis powers have lost their momentum. Then, we only need to hand over the dictator to the Allied forces. As for Britain, the United States, the Army and Navy, it doesn't matter. However, my personal suggestion is to make a gesture of goodwill to General Eisenhower. Luke finished his long speech, and the members of Howling Commandos looked at each other and suddenly smiled. Their hearts felt like a boulder had been lifted, and they all sighed with relief. Despite the fact that the young commander, who had previously denigrated the Italian army as worthless, was able to break into enemy territory and capture the leader with a single team, sounded like a legendary story only written in a third-rate novel, and had no truth to it at all. The Howling Commandos were willing to follow Luke. Not because of his charisma, but because they had no other choice. Anyway, they were all pulled aboard. What else can they do if they didn't follow the captain's orders? However, seeing Luke's plan and his confidence, the Howling Commandos had no other ideas. They felt they could trust this young captain. Let's disperse. Feeling the change of atmosphere in the team, Luke smiled. Perhaps it's not until this moment that he is truly recognized as the leader of this team. Comment. 46 comments. Vote. Chapter 32, Chapter 032 Melina. After a short rest, Luke enjoyed a big seafood meal alone, and stood at the balcony overlooking the serene sky. The afterglow of the sun as it sank into the horizon, children playing on the silver beach, and rows of palm trees swaying and dancing by the evening wind. Further away, the seagulls skimmed over the water, catching fish from the surging waves and tides. Luke's inner mood relaxed and a look of longing rose in his eyes. In a few days, no matter the Axis or the Allies, everyone will hear his name and his legendary deeds. Even if I don't follow the plot and Captain America, I can still be a hero in the eyes of the world. Luke smiled. To conquer a country with less than 30 people. This would be an amazing feat that could go down in history. Just as Pizarro conquered the Inca Empire that had a population of about 6 million with less than 200 people. After taking a deep breath and calming his thought, Luke went out alone in his rare leisure time. He walked along the street and came across a magnificent theater, where people were crowded and enthusiastic. Under the sparkling night sky, he could hear the song of Oedipus or Antigone when he stood still. Of course, he also met many charming Italian girls during this period. It's a pity that Luke didn't have any intention of having a fling, and failed to live up to these beautiful women's fiery enthusiasm. After walking aimlessly for 40 minutes, he returned to the hotel. Home. Luke, who was about to push the door open, stared at it and burst out with a cold glow. With his keen perception, he clearly heard another person's breathing in the room. Seemingly indistinct, it was difficult to detect it unless he listened carefully. Is Casa really stupid enough to betray me and give up the olive branch from the Allies? Or was the plan discovered by Hydra? A scurry of thoughts ran through Luke's mind. He gently pushed open the door and stepped on the soft carpet, without making any sound. The sea breeze blew through the half-open window as Luke walked slowly to the big bed in the main bedroom. He was confident that as long as the intruder showed the slightest movement, he would be able to break his opponent's neck in less than a second. Got you. Ah. Luke fiercely lifted the covers and threw himself on top of them, pressing his right hand against the intruder's neck. A woman. Luke, who was on top of the other person, had a shocked look in his eyes. A woman in silk nightgown was lying in his bed. She has wavy black hair, long legs slightly folded, and beautiful eyes full of tears, like a poor lost lamb. Who are you? Luke paused for a long while before he asked this. This woman, who was overflowing with maturity and beautiful curves, didn't look like a Hydra assassin. Her muscles didn't show signs of training, they were firm but lacked strength. And with a glance at the silk nightgown, there was no place to hide the weapons. My name is Melina. The woman's voice was as weak as her appearance. Hearing the woman's answer, Luke paused. The name sounded familiar. Then, he quickly realized that this was most likely the work of the mafia leader Alessandro. To make up for his nephew's offense, he sent a woman to him. Do I look thirsty? Luke silently noted down Alessandro's name. Do you know who I am? The trivial thoughts just lasted a nanosecond. Luke looked at Melina beneath him, and a look of amazement appeared in his eyes. He had to say. This woman fully embodied the word beautiful. Just like Goddess Venus of Rome, she exuded a charm, which could make any man swoon. She was like a ripe fruit on the branches. Even if Luke didn't taste it personally, he could imagine it from the fragrant aroma that filled his mind. Mr. Corleone. Don Alessandro said you're a powerful businessman. Melina looked away as if she didn't want to look into Luke's eyes. Her tone was mournful. Alessandro must have forced her to Luke's room. I didn't know Casa would do such a thing. Luke was embarrassed to look at Melina that had tears on her face. His personality was also affected due to the Superman card, so how could he possibly do something like taking a woman by force? It's all Alessandro's fault. So, Mr. Corleone, can you get up first? It's a little painful for me. The mature beauty beneath Luke's body had a hint of aggression and shame in her voice. Ah. Oh. When he heard Melena's weak voice requesting him, Luke realized that he was still on top of the person. He simply got up and sat on the edge of the bed and asked, "Did Casa send you here?" Alessandro said that as long as I can satisfy you, the Mafia, can help me get rid of the harassment from the officers and supply me with enough food every day. Melena lowered her head and turned to her side, hiding in the shadows. Unfortunately, she couldn't conceal the beautiful view. The moonlight outside the window spilled into the room, sketching out the graceful curve of this beautiful mature girl. It was pure but seductive. That thin silk nightgown draped on the outside, revealing her shoulders, in addition to adding a different kind of hidden sensual effect, there was no other role. Those beautiful eyes full of tears are full of clear and lovely sorrow. It would always attract the male's desire to protect the officers. Comment. 65 comments. Vote. Chapter 33, Chapter 033 Her Misery. Through conversation, Luke learned that Melena was a school teacher whose husband was drafted into the army on their wedding night to join the brutal war. Her beauty brought her many coveting eyes and unnecessary trouble. Just like an unattended orchard, full and attractive fruit, anyone would think of picking it with their own hands. The difference was that some people could only bury their desires in their hearts, while others have the means to implement them. Angelo, the constable of the small town of Taormina, was such a man. He had the intent, and the courage, to put them into practice. If it weren't for his sturdy ball and chain at home, with a voice so loud it sounded like a broken gong, the shrewish wife, who made a scene now and then. Angelo, the constable, may have picked this beautiful and delicate flower, Melena, by coercion. It was a turbulent time when the war between the Axis and the Allies had reached Sicily. During the war, Italy's monetary system collapsed, and prices soared. Also, Mussolini's control measures restricted the trading of food and gold jewelry. As a result, Italians were left to scavenge for food while cursing the damned dictator. Melena had her job. Apart from dealing with boring men's foul language in small towns and the harassment of the constable, she could still live and continue to stick to her boundaries. With the war hitting Sicily, the calmness of the past was broken. Everything had changed. Men in the small town seemed to become fierce all suddenly. They are like hungry wolves, waiting for someone to break into the orchard first and pick this ripe fruit. After that, Melena, who had lost her perseverance and chastity, would sooner or later become a plaything in this small town. "Your father is ill." Luke's face did not change, and he continued to ask. "Yes. Drugs and food are controlled, and the constable said he could get them for me, as long as I would stay with him for one night." Melena seemed somewhat reluctant to speak. Her eyes looked sad. "I'm ready to give in. It's too hard for a woman to live alone. Besides, I can't let my father be taken away by illness." But Don Alessandro came to the door, and he said, "If I could satisfy you, he will guarantee my future life." Melena's tone sounded helpless, and whether it's the town constable or the Sicilian mafia, there's nothing she can do against them. "I got it, Melena. You should rest here tonight. What comes next, I will ask Casa myself," Luke said faintly. He looked away and got up to leave the room. There is no doubt that Melena was a stunner who can arouse men's lust, but Luke wasn't interested in letting his lower body control his upper body and engage in lewd acts. One of the reasons why humans are at the top of the food chain compared to other animals in nature is because they probably know how to analyze and reflect. Desires do not easily dominate their brains. While an animal's nature is aggressive out of necessity, human nature is the foundation for establishing order. Mr. Corleone. Seeing Melina call out to him, Luke waved his hand and said, "There's some misunderstanding in the middle, and it's hard for me to explain it to you. I'm sorry for your fright and unnecessary trouble." Looking at this beautiful girl's indelible fear, Luke didn't say much. He just walked out of the room. Tonight, he had to rest in the second bedroom. At least, it's better than sleeping on the sofa. Luke thought so. The following day, Luke went downstairs to order breakfast and spoke to the mafia people guarding the hotel. Within 20 minutes, Alessandro arrived in a hurry. He walked into Luke's room, stood respectfully, and didn't even stretch out his hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "Why, Casa, you sent a woman to my bed last night and used such underhand means." Luke sat at the table, leisurely enjoying the local breakfast and pizza frittata. After picking up the coffee with his right hand and taking a sip, he added, "Did I come to Sicily to find a woman?" "Casa, I know what you mean, but I want to tell you that I value a person's ability more than flattery." Alessandro nodded. He thought that a hot-blooded young man like Luke would never be indifferent to a beautiful woman like Melina. Besides, in the impression of this mafia leader, the most effective way to please a big hoe was to send money and women. But when it came to Mr. Corleone, it didn't work. Luke seemed to guess Alessandro's thoughts but chose to not say anything. 20 gunmen are ready, and they are all good guys. They have long been dissatisfied with Mussolini, that cold-blooded butcher, and cruel executioner. Since Luke mentioned ability, Alessandro was eager to show his. "As for the pass, I've settled it and paid a lot of money to bribe the top brass of the Navy Patrol. You can get it the day after tomorrow at the latest." Facts had proven that Alessandro wouldn't only please his superiors, he also had a remarkable ability to handle affairs. Comment. 26 comments. Vote. Chapter 34, Chapter 034. Unless he liked men. Luke nodded with satisfaction. He couldn't stay in Sicily for too long. Otherwise, his fake identity of being Vito Corleone, a Berlin envoy, would be exposed. Taking advantage of the time difference in information exchange between Germany and Italy. As expected, it was the best way to enter Rome and approach Mussolini. If something unexpected happens, Luke could act alone and sneak into Venice Palace. One must know, the true meaning of being an assassin is to kill all enemies without anyone knowing. Judging from this, Luke felt that he would be an excellent assassin. However, Mr. Corleone, I'd like to say a few things in defense of the previous incident. After talking about business, Alessandro's eyes twinkled as he said, "I sent you a woman, not because I thought you were a man obsessed with beauty. Maybe you didn't know, Melina is a famous beauty in Sicily. Her husband Nino was taken away by the conscription officer on her wedding night. The other day, there was news of his death. Recently, Melina's father broke a leg and became seriously ill. It can be said that her situation is very bad. I thought a promising young man like you, Mr. Corleone, would naturally have a warm heart. Melina, she's desperate now. It's better for her if you take a fancy to her. That's why I took the liberty of sending her to your room." Luke's face was shocked. He didn't expect the mafia leader to be so brazen. He suddenly felt that he was wrong. Why would a bootlicker have nothing? Clearly, he had everything. Although Alessandro looked like a flattering jester, as the object of his flattery, Luke couldn't feel any ill feelings. This showed, even bootlickers had a hierarchy and depended on status. As for Alessandro, Luke could say he was already at the top. This guy is on another level, Luke told himself. He wiped the corners of his mouth, finished eating, and went to the living room. Alessandro took over the role of a gopher, bowing behind him. Who would have thought that this seemingly honest and loyal bearded mafia leader would do this? Mr. Corleone, to tell you the truth, in Sicily, there are a lot of men who covet Melina. She is alone and a widow. Even the constable is staring at this piece of juicy steak. If she can follow you, at least, it's much better than being reduced to a public plaything. Alessandro leaned against the sofa and looked carefully at Luke. Then leave her behind. Besides, don't think about sending me money and women, just do your own thing. Luke thought for a moment and answered in a soft voice. As a superior, he can't disappoint Alessandro's painstaking efforts. After all, as the mafia leader, bothering to do this kind of pimping, he would be despised by his own underlings. By the way, the constable, let's get rid of him first. The topic didn't stay on Melina, the charming and beautiful widow who was too pitiful. Luke didn't want to buy or trade her, treating her like property. A lonely woman with a stunningly beautiful and young face born in these turbulent times will definitely face many bad things. It had become the root of Melina's miserable life. Women in the small town rejected Melina and thought that she was only seducing men. Men coveted Melina's charming body and looked forward to being seduced by her one day. Find someone to kill him. It's best to make it look like an accident, and don't make too much of a scene. Luke faintly said as his expression turned cold. This is also a declaration of allegiance. If Alessandro did this, and he was tied to his chariot. If he wanted to rebel or betray, he should carefully consider the consequences. Mussolini's government wouldn't accept a mafia leader who assassinated the local constable. When the mafia was purged, a family shot the governor of Palermo in defiance of the law and caused Sicily's big sensation. As a result, Mussolini was furious. He arrested and executed more than 1,000 gangsters on the spot. As long as Alessandro did this, he had no choice but to take refuge in the Allies. I see. I will do it myself and make sure it is done beautifully. Alessandro nodded decisively. He considered himself well versed in assassinations. Which mafia boss didn't climb up slowly from this type of work? For Alessandro, the troubles that killing one person can solve were nothing. Then, I'll excuse myself, Mr. Corleone. If you have anything, you can summon me again. Before Alessandro left, he took off his hat, slightly bowed, and showed a look that all men knew. Melina has always been known as the flower of Sicily and is the bed companion that countless men dreamt of. When such a beautiful and charming woman is on the bed, even if he were indifferent now, sooner or later, he wouldn't be able to resist. Unless Mr. Corleone was not interested in women. But in Alessandro's eyes, there was no man in this world that wasn't lustful. At best, there was only the difference between a good man or a bad man. Ah well. What if Mr. Corleone was interested in men? Alessandro began to think, does he need to look for any good-looking men nearby? Unfortunately, he didn't know whether Mr. Corleone liked strong or skinny ones. Comment. 65 comments. Vote. Chapter 35, Chapter 035. Mr. Corleone is a decent man. If Luke knew Alessandro's bizarre thinking, he would put a hole in this guy's head with his fist. By the door of the main bedroom, draped in a silk nightgown, Melena's eyes looked complicated, as if she was finally relieved. She sat blankly on the bed, somewhat bewildered and overwhelmed. Melena had already prepared for the worst when she was sent to Luke's room. Played, violated, and then gradually slipped into the abyss of hell. This was all she could think of. But things didn't go in the worst possible direction. The man, Mr. Corleone, displayed a gentlemanly demeanor rarely seen in the small-town folk. Neither his movement nor words were frivolous. Thinking of this, Melena spoke from her heart. Mr. Corleone is a decent man. She was used to the disgusting stares of the men in town, who looked like they wanted to strip her clothes off with their eyes. She couldn't help but be sincerely grateful for Luke's restraint. Melena, who had lost confidence in men, shrank back into the quilt and wrapped herself. She could now finally sleep in peace. Melena. In her hazy sleep, Melena heard someone calling her name. In a trance, she seemed to think of her sick father and her dead husband. Pearls of tears came out and soaked the pillow she was holding as she relaxed, and the pressure which had been weighing her for many days turned into sorrow and heartache for her fate. Suddenly, Melena, who noticed the change in atmosphere around her, suddenly opened her eyes as if awakened. Then, she saw Mr. Corleone sitting by the bed with food on a tray. She didn't notice when she rolled over in her sleep. She wrapped her arms around his waist and her face positioned near his thigh. After such intimate behavior, Melena suddenly bounced away as if she had been electrocuted, bringing her back to reality. I saw that you were asleep quite some time, so I thought you might feel hungry when you get up, so I got some food for us. Luke's expression remained calm, and he didn't look away. He said, "You're the one who hugged first. I am indeed a decent man." The next day, early morning. The sky was a subtle gray, as the golden sun slowly leaped out of the horizon to wake up the sleeping Sicily. Luke opened his eyes and got up from the big bed in the second bedroom. He opened the flowy curtains and took a deep breath in the morning sun. He was as if a plant was photosynthesizing, feeling warm light seeping into his cells bit by bit and slowly transforming his body. It's another day full of energy. Luke stretched himself, walking into the bathroom. When he finished washing up, a hearty breakfast was already on the table. I wonder if Casa's mission has been completed. Luke rolled the seafood pasta with a fork and thought so as he ate. On this beautiful island, which is almost isolated from the rest of the world, the administrative officials are divided into a governor, a regional mayor, and a constable at the lowest level. After eliminating Tormina's constable, taking advantage of the blank period of selecting a successor, the mafia could do things conveniently. I wonder what Rogers is doing right now. Is he still performing on stage? After a while, Luke heard a noise in the main bedroom. Melena, who seldom slept well, carefully opened the door. She saw Luke sitting at the table, enjoying his food swiftly and efficiently. She was like a frightened deer, so scared that the head that she poked out hastily retracted. "You're awake. I've got a change of clothes for you, come and eat something." Luke smiled and whispered, "Melena, you and I stay under the same roof. We would always have to see each other. What's the use of avoiding me?" Melena came out silently in her silk nightgown after hearing that. She bent down, picked up the brand new clothes on the sofa, and then returned to the room. 10 minutes later, the main bedroom's door opened. Melena, dressed in a modest dress, sat down at the dining room table. "The pasta is cold. Just have the sandwiches and juice." Luke looked up and looked at her. It fits her. He was probably the first person ever to use supervision to guess a woman's 3 measurements. I told Casa that I would let you go back in a few days, don't get me wrong, Melina. I came to Sicily to do something. I won't stay long. I will leave tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. For the sake of confidentiality, I'll let you stay here for a couple of days. Luke's polite attitude made Melina relax a little. As Alessandro said, she has no job, no income source, and with the wartime food restrictions, she had become the sweet cake that all men in Sicily wanted to eat. If she didn't meet Luke, Melina would one day let go of her inner perseverance, and with her heart full of despair and numbness, she would have fallen. Thank you, Mr. Corleone. Thinking to this point, Melina couldn't help but be grateful to the young man sitting opposite her. She nibbled at the sandwich and watched Luke reading the newspaper. Clean short black hair, deep facial contour, slightly sharp eyes. In Sicily, she believed he could charm many beautiful, passionate, and unrestrained girls. Melina, I have to go out. If you need anything, you can contact the inn staff, and they will get it for you. Luke put the newspaper down and looked at the time. He thought he should go and see Alessandro and the 20 gunmen he recruited. Oh. Okay. Mr. Corleone. Melina leaned against the door, staring at Luke's leaving back and somehow feeling at ease. Initially, she was ready to become a plaything, but there seemed to be a glimmer of hope in her tragic life. Melina returned to the table with a complicated mood. She inadvertently saw the opened newspaper, especially a bold headline that reads, "Shocking. The constable's car fell off a cliff. Read what happened. The constable is dead." Melina was in a daze and didn't know what to say. The heaviest piece of stone in her heart disappeared. Just like that. Suddenly. It's Mr. Corleone. Melina thought of Don Alessandro, a bully in Sicily and whom no one dared to mess with, but he bowed to the young man and was careful to show his goodwill. Is it really him? Melina, who experienced emotional ups and downs, looked at the clear blue sky and white clouds outside the window. Her heart was like a turbulent sea, and she could no longer calm down. Comment. 82 comments. Vote. Chapter 36, Chapter 036 Stirring Emotions. Luke, who has left the inn, didn't know that Melina, who stayed in the room, had lost herself in his thoughts. He took howling commandos with him, left the town first, and walked around the coastline several times. After mapping out the guard positions and defensive forces of the barracks stationed around the area, he returned to the Bronze Bell Tavern. In the backyard, there were dozens of strong young men standing around. These are the best fighters in the family. They all have good and accurate marksmanship and are willing to die for the family. Alessandro didn't take the initiative to mention the constable's accident, which was simply a trivial matter. The mafia had always been good at those kinds of things. The constable, who looked like a fat pig, went to his mistress's house once a week. Alessandro just told his people to secretly do something to his car so that it could be disguised as brake failure. The car skidded, and unfortunately fell off the cliff with the person still inside. Anyway, there were no surveillance cameras these days. It is impossible to find clues and find the murderer. They are Camorra family's army, or your army? He asked faintly. Of course, it's mine. But now it's yours, Mr. Corleone. Don Alessandro seemed to have thought of the answer a long time ago. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "This is Mr. Vito Corleone. His father is Sicilian. Because of the cruel persecution from Mussolini, the dictator and executioner, he had to leave his homeland and wander around. Now, Mr. Corleone has a successful career. He has returned to his homeland with bread and wine, guns and bullets. Starting from today, we are no longer members of the Camorra family. There is only one person to whom I owe allegiance, and that is Mr. Corleone. Luke quietly watched Alessandro's performance, seeing him say he was Sicilian without even blinking, trying to exaggerate the helplessness and anger of being persecuted and uprooted from his homeland. He could only say that the future generation owes this man an Oscar. Sure enough, acting and lying are skills that any superior must be proficient in. Luke sighed with emotion. Although Alessandro was in front of him, flattering him like a jester and as humble as a bootlicker. But it was because Luke represented the allies behind him. In addition to the 3 defeats, he had made this mafia leader bow his head. Because of this, Luke didn't really feel contempt for Alessandro. Even the most docile wolf would eat people when it's hungry. Once you let your guard down, you might get bitten at some point. You are not standing here today to serve me. The name Vito Corleone is just a stranger to you. Luke's eyes swept over the people standing in the backyard, some of whom Alessandro had recruited as gunmen, others as mafia hitmen. These young people, who he had never met, might not have any loyalty to him. But they were subservient to the family leader, power, and status. It is a centuries-old tradition of the mafia to be loyal to the family and never betray. Although it's said that the American mafia, which has its roots in North America, is on the verge of forgetting these outdated traditional rules, this is still very useful in Sicily. When Mussolini launched his mafia purge, he arrested thousands of suspects and tortured them. Whipping, pulling off fingernails, or even electrocution, all kinds of brutal torture. Even so, few people dared to betray their families. Even so, in defiance of fascism and Mussolini. According to different factions and families, the mafia has set up assassination teams, with leading members acting as assassins. These men called themselves the Honor Association and targeted senior Nazi officials and officers for assassination. The mafia was chosen as an informant by the Strategic Science Reserve precisely because of their violent elements, and they weren't afraid of Mussolini's government and could be easily bought. Luke looked around. Surprisingly, he was younger than many of the people in the backyard. However, the intense atmosphere brought by the Superman card formed a pronounced sense of oppression, like a mountain peak pressing down on the hearts of the people. The crowd was silent, and no one made any noise. Your loyalty towards me is for the honor of the mafia family, the betterment of your family, and future. Before Mussolini came to power, the police had to grovel to you, and even the constable had to be respectful, but now, they could randomly drag any one of you into prison as a suspect and then hang you at the square to be shot. This dictatorship is trampling on the dignity of every mafia member and insulting the honor of each one of you. It's time to rise and fight like a real man. Even if you bleed to death, at least you can get the glory and dignity. Luke's voice was calm, passionate, and full of emotion like a speech, not different from what he usually talks. But when it reached the ears of the crowd, it seemed like every word was full of power. They can't help but feel their blood boiling. Even Alessandro, who was standing by, felt the same. The fierce face, full of beard, was full of excitement as if it had recovered its lost youth. Constantine's expert in deception is easy to use. I need to exchange a few more in the future, in case of an emergency. Luke had exchanged Constantine's skill card in the shop with the reputation he had saved these couple of days. the demon exorcist, who spent many years professionally backstabbing his team members and was nicknamed the world's greatest con man, had the devil on his left shoulder and an angle on his right one. From the Justice League to the supervillains, many people have been conned by him. Be careful when Constantine becomes your team member, it often means the death flag is flying over your head. However, even though he was a con man that could con people, and his skills were first class, in the future, he would simply go and be a top lecturer in a particular school for gifted children. When it comes to stirring up emotions and conning people to death, he was probably only a little worse than the Pharaoh of the Axis powers. Today, I am not asking you to fight for me, the family and honor, but also, for yourself. To overturn the Apennine Peninsula. Let the Mafia and the name of the Corleone family resound through Sicily again. Prove that you are not cowards but brave fighters. Comment. 59 comments. Vote. Chapter 37, Chapter 037 The Plan to Ambush. Once Luke was finished talking, a chorus of voices erupted from the backyard. This scene was like a lecture on success, for the future generations. When successful entrepreneurs and well-known rich people carefully boiled their speech after their so-called pep talk, the audience sitting below would be so excited that they couldn't wait to start a business. In the backyard, the same was true of the influential and hot-blooded mafia members. Everyone was excited as if they would rush into the barracks at the next moment and hang those damn Nazis in the square. We are willing to follow and obey all orders, Don Corleone. A slightly smarter young man stepped out of the crowd and took the lead in shouting. Then, sounds of response came one after another. These fresh blood recruits from Alessandro offered their loyalty one after another. At this moment, Luke had become the godfather of Sicily's mob. On the character panel, the reputation value kept soaring upwards. This skill card is not a bad exchange. Luke is secretly satisfied. The reputation value he had managed to save was all thrown into Constantine's skill card. Now, he didn't only get his capital back, and he also had a slight surplus. Too bad there's only a 24-hour time limit on its use, damn it, system. You're even taking advantage of a Kryptonian. Luke couldn't help but sigh. After making the pre-battle preparations, he was ready to leave for Rome. The plan was to divide the troops in two ways. He and Dum Dum Dugan will pose as Berlin's secret envoys, while the rest of them lurk in through Alessandro's channels. After the two sides meet, they will go straight to Venice Palace. However, before this, they still had a task. Raid a nearby naval camp to create opportunities for Allied troops to land on shore. Give them the food and guns, as for the bullets will be given at the end. Keep an eye on it, and don't cause any trouble. After delivering a provocative speech, Luke left the rest to Alessandro. Also, you contacted mafia members of other families before. Did they answer? I got Don Carlo out of his cell, as you said. He is willing to take refuge in the Allies. Several other families have also agreed that they can be counted on for the raid on the naval camp. Alessandro said as he bowed his head. He hadn't been idle these days. Besides sending Luke women, he also contacted several prominent families in the mafia. Hearing that Alessandro hooked up with the Allied forces and he also became close to the Strategic Science Reserve, those bosses showed loyalty and wanted to help. They mixed up their identities as anti-dictatorship and freedom fighters, to avoid bad luck after the war. That's good. Luke nodded his head. As a smuggler, all the goods he shipped were guns and bullets. Bread, cigarettes, and red wine were used as a cover-up. At first, Luke didn't tell Alessandro about their plan to raid the naval camp and only told him at the 11th hour. Because, at this time, the mafia leader had no way to jump ship and could only obediently obey. After repeatedly explaining him some details, Luke returned to the inn where the Howling Commandos members waited with bated breath for the captain's orders. Alessandro is in contact with the chief officer of the camp. He is a senior official of the military supplies department. His mistress happened to be having an affair with a mafia hitman, and then his wife had a relationship with a painter. Anyway, it was a very confusing situation. Luke talked about the Navy camp officer being cuckolded, and he couldn't help but give a moment of silence for him. There is no such thing as a quiet period, but someone will carry the burden for you. In short, through this relationship, Alessandro had contacts with him, and the two sides have already talked. When the time comes, I will pretend to be a smuggler and sell some tobacco and wine at a low price in the name of doing business. Casa will also find a group of stripper girls to go over and comfort the Navy soldiers. Luke carefully arranged everything. It would have been idiotic to mess with the German armored divisions stationed in Sicily. But he can raid the Italian naval camp with the strength of the Howling Commandos. It would be no problem. After all, who didn't know that the Italian army is corrupt from top to bottom? Also can be said that they were rotten to the core. Senior officers openly colluded with smugglers and let strippers into the barracks. This kind of thing would have been the reasons for court-martial in the Allies. What's more, Luke had a secret weapon. Scarecrow's fear gas. First of all, destroy their radio stations and prevent all information from leaking, and then. Luke uttered instructions, and the Howling Commandos nodded. They had already seen the outstanding ability of the young captain. This time, even if Mussolini isn't captured alive, as long as the return trip was smooth, it would be more than enough. However, crossing the long front, sneaking into Italy, and capturing the naval camp in Sicily. This honor alone was enough to make the Howling Commandos war heroes and be significantly commended by the Allies. Take a break. At 8:10, get ready to move. Luke waved off the team and turned around to see Melina coming out of the bedroom. She was wearing a long black velvet dress with knitted patterns on her neckline and cuffs, elegant and gorgeous. The fabric fits gently on her body, outlining the luscious curves. Mr. Corleone, come back safely. The mature and beautiful woman seemed to understand. Her lips squirmed a few times and whispered. /N, few big announcements tomorrow, including a potential project. Comment. 53 comments. Vote. Chapter 38, Chapter 038 Night Raid, announcement at chapter end. Dark clouds loomed, obscuring the dim stars and the moon. At 8:20 p.m., Luke swaggered into the naval camp with the Howling Commandos in disguise and greeted the soldiers eagerly. Boxes of tobacco, wine, and food were sent to the officers' barracks as if they didn't need the money. There were also enchanting and coquettish stripper girls, wearing exposed clothing, posing on the stage for performance, attracting hooting from men below. Captain David, here's a small token of my appreciation. In the munitions department's meeting room, Luke, wearing a black hat, coat, and suit, sat across the desk. He pulled out a palm-sized long gift box with a smile on his face with a glittering pearl necklace inside. One could tell it was expensive, based on its color and size. I came in a hurry and didn't bring any gifts, so I'm giving a necklace to the captain, Mrs. Captain David, who had a beer belly, nodded in satisfaction and put away the gift box without a word. In these times of war, the monetary system had already collapsed. Banknotes are no different from waste paper. Only gold and jewelry were hard currency. By the way, for the other, Captain David can give it to a friend. Luke turned to another gift box, and inside was an even more valuable green agate necklace. Captain David's eyes lit up. This smuggler has done his homework, even knowing that I have a mistress. He didn't notice Luke's pitying eyes at all. The captain didn't know the color of the hat he himself was wearing, just like the green agate necklace. He was genuinely clueless. T-note, green hat equals cuckold. To tell the truth, Mr. Corleone, I've heard Lieutenant Sirio talk about you. Since you are his friend, you are also my friend. If you want to engage in smuggling, the Navy will give you a warm welcome to ensure your ships are unimpeded. Captain David is also a sincere man, and after receiving the benefits from others, he patted his chest and promised, in the future, I can have Lieutenant Sirio send a battleship to escort any of your smuggling ships. Then, thank you, Captain David, this is just a small gift. The surprise is yet to come. Luke's eyes flickered for a moment as he said meaningfully. However, we also have conditions. As long as Mr. Corleone is willing to let the Navy take half of every cargo, we will certainly work well together. Captain David's eyes were full of greed. He finally made real offer. The Navy can't carry out smuggling openly and earn huge profits, so they wanted to use Mr. Corleone as an ATM. Half of the profit from each private shipment could let these senior naval officers eat their fill. Right now, the domestic situation is agitated, and the war is increasingly fierce. The only way to make money was to seize any opportunity. This is what Captain David thought. You know, we take a huge risk by covering up smuggling and possibly going to military court. Looking at Captain David's insatiable appearance, Luke still had a smile on his face and didn't seem to be angry at all. He suddenly stood up, raised his hand, looked at the time, and whispered, "It's time." "Mr. Corleone, what are you talking about?" Captain David was bewildered. He didn't know why the smuggler stood up for no reason. Moreover, the overlooking eyes of the other party made him very uncomfortable. It was as if his existence suddenly became small. "Sit down, Mr. Corleone," Captain David said in an aggravated and irritated tone. "Haven't you noticed yet, Captain? You are no longer qualified to give orders." Luke laughed as he heard the commotion coming from outside. With the fear gas produced by Gotham's scarecrow, taking care of these Italian soldiers couldn't be easier. The howling commandos only needed to wear gas masks before releasing the gas. Before long, the whole camp will be paralyzed. The Navy soldiers, gripped by fear, were like lambs to the slaughter, completely defenseless. "What's going on? What's going on? What do you want? I'm warning you, don't come over here." Captain David finally realized that something was wrong. The frightened screams outside were now coming into the room. He quickly pulled out the pistol attached to his belt, but before he pulled the trigger, his arm was twisted and broke. The white bone splinter pierced the skin and spurted out a lot of blood. A sharp pain struck, and Captain David fell to his knees, unable to help but cry loudly, trying to alert the guards outside the door. "I'm sorry, I didn't control my strength." Luke apologized without sincerity. Looking at Captain David, who kept moving his bloated body backward, there was no fluctuation in his heart. Thanks to the experience he learned from painting houses with Uncle Frank, Luke had no psychological burden from blood nor death. "Don't waste your energy. The soldiers in the camp either went to see the strippers or are crying in terror. The guards on duty were also taken care of by us," he faintly said. The entire camp, including the lower marine police quarters, the construction department, the munitions department, the health department, the port authority, and the warehouse, had long since collapsed under Howling Commando's sudden attack on Mafia members. Even patrol boats, minesweepers, and logistics support boats were eliminated by a gang of brazen invading Mafia in the name of Captain David's rewards for the soldiers. It isn't only Scarecrow's fear gas, but drinks laced with something special. Drinking it will incapacitate anyone, even elephants. This incident showed that the Italian army, without any vigilance, was lax enough to be handled by a gang of Mafia. "Let me go. Please, Mr. Corleone, sir." Captain David begged and even changed his address. "Of course, I will let you go. Killing prisoners is inhuman behavior." Luke shrugged his shoulders. He just let go of his strength and made the unfortunate captain scrunch his expression. "Don't be so afraid, Captain David. I'm not the devil." Captain David's eyes were full of fear. Luke is no different from the devil in his heart. How can an ordinary person break his arm as if he was breaking chopsticks? Moreover, he also felt that the other party didn't use any effort at all. "Stay here and don't try to do stupid things. You can't inform the garrison troops in other camps because we have already destroyed the radio station and also cut the phone lines." Luke took a deep look at Captain David, then walked over and took the pearl necklace back. As for the other green agate necklace, it was a fake prepared by Alessandro. Luke pushed open the door of the meeting room, and heard faint cries of horror outside. The fear gas instantly transformed the Italian naval soldiers into fragile infants. They were dragged into darkness by fear gas, and the most frightening visions appeared in their minds, destroying their will. The screams of fear echoed under the night sky. However, the slight noise that came out swallowed instantly by the sound of waves lapping against the rocks. A group of mafias swarmed in, using axes or pistols, killing all the patrolling guards in sight without mercy. Simple and decisive. It was a silent raid. Luke stood on high, looking down at the bloody flowers blooming in the night, and sketched a satisfied smile around his mouth. By tomorrow, half of Sicily will fall into his hands. Binge announcement. I have few things to announce as we start this new month. 1. Drafts of an original fanfic by our editor, Xenon Wonder, are under progress. Name, Attack on Titan, Survival Mode, subject to change. Tags, Action, Transmigration, No Harem, Comedy, Adventure, No System, OC Male Lead, Romance. This fanfic will be released on this account during second week of May. It is still under outlining, and since writing anything unplanned and hitting a writer's block something neither of us wish to see, this fanfic will be planned from start to end before writing. If you have any idea you wish to share with our editor, and the FL you wish to see, paragraph comment on this sentence. Xenon Wonder also has original novel on this platform. Search his name and check out his novel. 2. Now, coming to this fanfic, we now have P.A.T.R.E.O.N for Marvel Superman. You can visit the link below, also added under synopsis, and get privilege access to up to 20 advanced chapters of this fanfic. All patrons will get 3 votes in the trial reads in the Discord server, next month. Visit the link right now and check out of the other rewards you can get. From special Discord server role to shout out in the chapters, we have quite a good number of rewards and more will be coming in future. Link, patreon.com/binge translations. Update schedule will now be 1ch/d to give our translator summer and editor Kun some rest. This work would have been impossible without their hard work and consistency. Comment. 48 comments. Vote. Chapter 39, Chapter 039. Be careful, risky road ahead. When the sun rose the next day, Sicily maintained the rhythm of its everyday life. The slight change were the rumors that Melina climbed onto the bed of a prominent merchant, the constable's accident, and the strippers in the naval camp. This new gossip provided the town residents with many things to talk about at the dinner table. As long as the Allied forces didn't launch a large-scale bombing attack, as long as the air defense alarm didn't sound, Taormina was calm. The light of dawn shone over the town along the horizon. Luke jumped off a jeep and went back to the Walkyria Hotel. He stayed up all night, but he was still in high spirits. Let Alessandro's men watch carefully and don't make any trouble. Before entering the door, Luke instructed. The accompanying Dum-Dum Duggan nodded to show his understanding. At this juncture, no one should make any mistakes. After a night of raiding and cleaning up, the naval camp was entirely under the Howling Commandos' control. From Colonel Bonino to the junior recruits, all were taken as prisoners from the top commander. According to Alessandro's report, after a head count against the list, there were over 500 officers of all ranks, together with the new recruits and sailors. Some of them inhaled too much fear gas, causing mental disorders and complete incapacitation. Others wanted to resist but were neutralized by the mafia, who stormed into the camp from behind. In a word, only about 420 people survived and became prisoners. The mafia imprisoned all of them in the barracks and warehouses in batches and under their care. Mainelli sent a message through the only transmitter preserved in the camp, saying that naval vessels need maintenance and will not participate in patrol and defense affairs for a couple of days. No one would find out that this naval camp had fallen into the Allies' hands during this time. Like the shadow under the lights. No one thought that there was a daring secret team that sneaked into the heart of the Axis, ready to deliver a fatal blow. As for the prisoners in the naval camp, will there be any trouble? Luke didn't worry about it. As long as the mafia steadily provided Italian Navy soldiers with food, they would be as obedient as domesticated animals. Throughout World War II, Italian troops' strength was there, but they were unwilling to fight, and their will was extremely low. They wanted to run away when they saw other countries' troops, even if they had the advantage in numbers. The most interesting one was when the Italian army met the British army. The former wanted to follow the usual practice and just surrender. As a result, the latter seemed to be tired of this kind of fighting without fighting, not only refusing Italy's surrender but also putting 2 liaison officers to death. This angered the Italian officers, who called on their soldiers to fight back and beat the confident British army to the ground. It can be said that this battle was Italy's most courageous one. If I were the Führer, I'm afraid I would feel desperate too. What kind of teammates were all these? Luke got rid of his superfluous thoughts and went back to his room. Good morning, Mr. Corleone. The beautiful Melina was sitting at the dinner table. She seemed to have just taken a bath. She pulled her wavy black hair behind her head, and her beige lace silk pajamas couldn't cover up her proud figure. Looking down, those long and straight legs stepped on the carpet, adding a seductive aura. She was indeed the most beautiful woman in Sicily. An ordinary dress alone was enough to make many men crazy about her. Luke calmly looked away and sat down at the table. This is for me. I am a little hungry. When he saw the seafood pasta on the table, he took it without any formalities. Slurp. Slurp. After a storm of slurps, Luke looked up at Melina, who was staring blankly at him, and asked, "Is there a problem?" "I already took a bite," Melina faintly said. She isn't as wary of Luke as before. Instead, she relaxed and stopped being too formal. As for the reasons behind this change, Melina herself couldn't tell. "I'm really sorry, I've been busy all night," Luke said with little sincerity. "By the way, you can call me Luke. No need to call me Corleone. I've asked Casa to send your father to Palermo, where he can get into Sicily's best hospital for treatment and recuperation." "Thank you, Mr. Call." Luke. Melina, who previously looked sad, had a smile of joy on her face. She was holding a warm glass of milk in her hands, and her voice showed gratitude. Thinking of the accident that happened to the constable and then the proper arrangements for her father, Melina felt a sense of relief, and the days she spent at the hotel was the most relaxing she had ever had. Not having to worry about men's greedy minds and women's vicious curses. "Don't be so polite. By the way, I will probably leave Sicily tomorrow. Casa will take you home then," Luke said as if he was indifferent about it. "Don't worry, Melina. No one will bully you in this small town. I already told Casa." The smile that appeared on Melina's face froze for a moment. "Yes. I wish you a pleasant journey," the beautiful woman said with great reluctance. Melina didn't say much. She soon got up and went back to her room. Luke's lips rose, looking at the graceful figure leaving in a hurry. He is waiting for the night to come. The afterglow of dusk gradually sank into the sea. Melina didn't come out of the bedroom until dinner time. Luke simply packed his bags. He would no longer be Vito Corleone tomorrow but Captain Steiner from Berlin, who won the Iron Cross. T-note, Führer, also spelled Führer, German Führer, leader, the title used by Adolf Hitler to define his role of absolute authority in Germany's Third Reich, 1933-45. Please support us by read 20+ advanced chapters on p.a.t.r.e.o.n. Visit patreon.com/binge translations. Link also available in synopsis. Comment. 52 comments. Vote. Chapter 40, Chapter 040. Be careful, risky road ahead, 2. The clock on the wall slid into the early hours of the morning, and Luke, who was still awake, heard a noise in the next room. Then carefully pushed the open door and someone is standing at the entrance of the second bedroom. The breathing became even more rapid, and the sound of a heartbeat was prominent. Lying in bed, Luke could almost turn the information she received in his mind into dynamic pictures through super listening. Standing there for so long. "Aren't you going to come in?" Just as Melina flinched and was ready to turn away, the door was opened. Luke, clad in a robe, asked in a teasing tone. "If you want to see me off, it seems a bit early." In the dimly lit living room, only the bright moonlight came in from the window. Luke took a step forward, almost sticking to Melina. The latter looked up, her charming body trembling, and a blush appeared on her beautiful face. Like the burning clouds of Sicily in the sunset. "I thought you weren't coming." Luke made a move and hooked up Melina's chin with his fingers. "What would you have done if I hadn't come?" Melina tried to avoid Luke's aggressive gaze but failed. "Then, I would have come over." "Melina, I'm not the decent Mr. Corleone you imagine. I have a strong possessive nature and like to take what I like for myself. I am more like a villain than the mafia, and I covet your beauty more than the men in town." Luke's fingers traced over Melena's red lips, and his other arm circled to the slender waist and brought it closer with force. Melena was surprisingly not offended by Luke's confession. She wanted to say something, but Luke blocked her plump red lips. Outside the window, the darkness of the night was getting deeper and deeper. After a whole night of lovemaking, Luke woke up refreshed the following day. When he got up, he couldn't help but get a strange idea. How did Superman from the studio next door complete the act of biological reproduction with his girlfriend, Lois Lane? For the time being, if he didn't consider the combination between Kryptonian and Earthlings, would there be any problems? Someone that could carry an aircraft weighing hundreds of tons, the firm muscle density that even heavy weapons couldn't penetrate. Such a steel body, won't it break Lois Lane as if she were an inflatable doll? Luke walked into the bathroom with this inexplicable question. To be honest, it was supposed to be a strenuous exercise that made men exert all their efforts and consume their physical strength. For him, who had loaded the Superman card, it was a bit too tricky. Especially controlling his strength was a great test of ability. This is only the LV-1 civilians. If he unlocked a high-level card, Luke might consider becoming an abstinent superhero without touching the opposite sex. Being overly adequate was really not pleasurable. Luke muttered in a low voice. He just felt like a relentless pile driver throughout the process. Will you come back? Lying on the bed, Melena's face remained somewhat charming. She stared at Luke, who was changing into new clothes and preparing to leave. She asked faintly. Melena didn't know whether what she had done was right or wrong. But there's no doubt that Luke's arrival freed her from her tragic fate and gave her an unprecedented sense of security. It's like a ray of sunshine shining into a gloomy world full of haze. Don't worry, before long, and you will hear my name spread all over Sicily. I should almost be back by then. Luke bowed his head and kissed Melena's smooth forehead. While it's good to be in a gentle home, it was also important to take the first step in his future career. Captain America only defeated Hydra and Red Skull and created an opportunity for the Allies to win the war. He was hailed to the skies by the American military. In the next 70 years, Steve Rogers became a well-known legend, and there were many fans like Coulson. After recovery from the glacier and thawing, he naturally occupied a leading position in both S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers due to his special status. That was the role of reputation. Standing on the commanding heights of morality at all times. The federal government and superheroes would give him proper respect. Then be careful, I'll wait for you. Melena nodded her head sweetly, like a lazy cat. She didn't think it was a lie, and she didn't know about what great things this man would do to make his name spread all over Sicily. She simply believed that Luke would come back. At 3:40 tomorrow afternoon, Allied troops will land ashore. Luke looked serious, stared at Alessandro, and said, Casa, do this well, and you will truly become the most respected person of Sicily, maybe even Italy. The mayor, prime minister, even Mussolini. All these powerful people who once despised you will bow down to you and call you sir. I will. Captain Cavill. The mafia leader was so excited that his voice trembled. This is the first time he called Luke by his name. After all, Vito Corleone was now a thing of the past. Captain Steiner's identity, the Berlin envoy and recipient of the Iron Cross, also wasn't expected to last long. Luke divided his troops in two, as initially planned. He took Dum Dum Dugan, who was accompanying him, and boarded a ship for Rome. Hitler once said that military uniforms must look good, so that young people would join the military without hesitation. Luke had to say that there was some truth in his words. He dressed in a tailored captain's uniform, looked at himself in the mirror. The lapel pins, epaulets, and wristbands are embellished with the black regalia, and he wore a large brimmed hat with a silver double-headed eagle emblem on his head. There's a woolen center coat on the outside and a pair of calfskin gloves on his hands. This time, Luke, with the profoundly contoured young face, looks like a handsome and sharp Nazi senior military officer. From now on, I am Captain Steiner, the envoy from Berlin. I was born into a military family in Germany and joined the SS. I am Heinrich Luitpold Himmler's confidant. The purpose of this trip to Rome is to deliver the orders from the Führer. Luke repeated his identity to Dum-Dum Dugan. Got it? The latter noted silently. They are about to infiltrate into the enemy's territory and capture their leader alive. There's no room for sloppiness with details. Discord, still under progress. I am new to this platform, so still understanding bots and stuff. Should be online by Monday. Update schedule, 1 chapter every day, midnight GMT +8. Advert. Please support us by reading 20+ privilege chapters on p.a.t.r.e.o.n. Visit patreon.com/binge translations. * monthly 72 chapters for God of Thunder members. 6 chapter mass release every Friday. Link also available in synopsis. Comment. 44 comments. Vote. Chapter 41, Chapter 041 The First Shot. Thank you, Day 196, for supporting this work and becoming our first patron. The boat ride from Sicily to Rome took less than half a day, and Luke arrived at his destination in no time. Standing on the ship's prow, he could see Italy's capital surrounded by various large and small hills, known as the City of Seven Hills. The walls of the city are irregular in shape, like a crouching lion, staring down at the Apennines. Rome City is arguably one of the oldest cities in history, located in the Latin plains of the Apennines in the middle of the Mediterranean. It had experienced two periods, Republic and Empire. It is the birthplace of ancient Roman mythology and has a glorious history and cultural heritage. Luke disembarked from the port in a dignified manner and presented his long-prepared documents. His cold face matched his sharp military uniform, exuding the momentum of a superior who just no one can approach. This made it difficult for the soldiers who questioned him, making them unable to examine him too carefully, afraid they would offend this young senior officer. After taking a general look at the documents and checking his identity, they let them go respectfully. If this were Berlin, the Gestapo wouldn't have been so easily fooled. Dugan, we will succeed in conquering this country and gaining unprecedented glory. Luke entered Rome, the heart of Italy and the center of Mussolini's rule. After winning World War I, the Roman papacy witnessed the strength of the Italian forces led by Mussolini. So, the two sides signed the Lateran Treaty, which recognized Rome as Italy's capital, while the Italian government recognized the Roman papacy's sovereignty over the Vatican. After that, the ambitious Mussolini wasn't satisfied. He led an army to Rome City and declared a union with Nazi Germany to form the Franco-Spanish Axis. Many people thought that Hitler was the founder of the fascist doctrine. But it was Mussolini who opened this Pandora box. To a certain extent, he could be considered the teacher of the Third Reichsführer. After the First World War, the European landscape was reshuffled, and the people of Italy felt a deep sense of loss over the uneven distribution of benefits after the war. This, coupled with a stagnant domestic economy and a difficult life for the people, Mussolini found a political entry point. He initiated the fascist movement in Milan and established the first Republican Fascist Party globally. However, this politician, who was bent on being a dictator, was essentially an opportunist. At least in terms of speeches and stirring up emotions, he had no outstanding ability than his student Hitler. Initially, in the Axis camp, Mussolini was on an equal footing with the Third Reich Führer, and even Hitler maintained a respectful attitude toward him. But who knew, the Italian army's performance was abysmal, either surrendering, falling without fighting, or calling on the German team members to come to the rescue. Mussolini even summoned Hitler, a student, to help him out when he had problems. The Führer grew to despise this man and almost called him a trash on the phone. Especially after Mussolini was placed under house arrest by the King of Italy and then rescued was by Hitler's special forces. This once ambitious dictator was reduced entirely to a puppet manipulated by Germany. "Captain, you always create miracles that we can't imagine." Duggan stood behind Luke and remarked confidently. After getting along these few days, even if Luke said that he would fly to Berlin, bring Hitler out and end the war that was sweeping the world, he probably wouldn't doubt it. The two arrived at Venice Square, where Luke gazed at the vast and magnificent palace. That was the Venice Palace, founded by the Pope of Rome. And right now, it's the political center where Mussolini ruled over 40 million Italians and the most heavily guarded part of the city. Tomorrow, the first shot to conquer Italy will be fired here. London, Allied Command. At the secret base of the SSR team. A busy, hot, and tense atmosphere. A month has passed and the Allied Forces Intelligence Department had begun a fierce battle with Hydra. The spies and agents of both sides are active in the major cities in the rear, such as the Axis powers Berlin and the Allies London, New York, and Poland. People on both sides keep intercepting each other's intelligence. Although the Strategic Science Reserve had gathered all the elites from the Allies, it's still at a disadvantage in the face of Hydra, whose actions were more secretive and powerful. So far, we haven't found the exact location of the Hydra base. Where were the captured Allied soldiers sent? What experiments were the German Nazis conducting in secret? We don't know anything. Colonel Phillips roared loudly, and harsh reprimands echoed in the room, which silenced the people below. In just 1 month, we sacrificed 13 agents, and 4 spies embedded in the Axis countries were discovered. This is the greatest loss the Strategic Scientific Reserve has suffered since its inception. Allied Command is disappointed in us. And I'm disappointed in you. Colonel Phillips was angry, and one of the reasons is he got a call from President Roosevelt yesterday. Although the man in charge of the White House hadn't expressed any opinions about the Strategic Science Reserve, but from his tone of voice, the colonel could recognize the implicit message of accountability. Initially, the Allied forces gradually advanced on the battlefield, and many people felt that the Axis powers had lost their momentum. But no one expected that the Red Skull, who got the Tesseract, used Hydra's scientific reserves to develop potent energy weapons and applied them to guns, tanks, and other heavy weaponry. Powerful technology beyond this era had brought the Axis powers from a state of collapsing to a standstill. The situation of losing ground and falling into disadvantage had also eased. On the contrary, the Allies began to show weakness in Eastern Europe's battlefield, and the established defensive front was in jeopardy. For a series of reasons, the Strategic Science Reserve was under tremendous pressure. They weren't able to figure out the technical basis behind the energy weapons that Hydra has mastered yet. The military factory's exact location and the secret base of Hydra's, they didn't even have the slightest clue. Hydra's agents had long infiltrated the Allies' top and bottom, making it impossible to avoid them. This situation made the team led by Colonel Phillips reactive in terms of intelligence. Have you heard from Luke? Creators' thoughts. BingeFics. Please support us by reading 20+ privilege chapters on p.a.t.r.e.o.n. Visit patreon.com/binge translations. *monthly 72 chapters for God of Thunder members. 6-chapter mass release every Friday. Link also available in synopsis. Comment. 37 comments. Vote. Chapter 42, Chapter 042 Capturing Mussolini. Have you heard from Luke? After venting his anger, Colonel Phillips turned and looked at Peggy Carter next to him. He could only pin his hopes on Luke's success now. If the raid on Rome is successful, the plan to help the Allies land in Sicily would be successful. Not only will the Allies' morale soar, but the status of the SSR would also rise. I received a telegram from Captain Cavill yesterday. They occupied a naval camp near Sicily. At 3:40 this afternoon, the Allied forces will land on shore with the local mafia's help. This operation is codenamed as Trojan Horse. Carter's meticulously reported. She didn't expect Luke actually to do it. Take a team, go deep into the enemy's hinterland, and raid the leader. Now, they were one step away from success. Italy, Rome. Time, 2 p.m. sharp. As Luke approached Venice Square, the first thing that struck him is the magnificent palace on the north side of Capitoline Hill. Once the Pope's residence, the most beautiful building in Rome now fell into Mussolini's hands. The dictator often spoke to the people gathered in the square from the expansive balcony. With the rank of captain, the status of Berlin envoy, and Dum-Dum Duggan is standing behind him, which spared him the trouble of being interrogated by the patrolling guards. When will Mussolini meet us? Duggan asked in a low voice. At 4 p.m. When he gets up from his mistress' bed. Luke chuckled. He stood in the square, like a tourist enjoying the scenery. Mainelli and the others should be moving soon. Duggan nodded silently. According to the plan, Jimmy, the sniper, had already secured a high point. Kenneth, the gunner, was driving a truck and slowly pulling up to the side of the road, a block away. It contained 20 shooters, carefully selected from mafia members, and a Maxim heavy machine gun. It must have taken Alessandro a lot of hard work to bring that thing in without being found. The next step was for them to attract the Venetian Square Guard's attention, create chaos, and create the best opportunity for Luke. Do you think Mr. Mussolini will be surprised to see us later? At this time, Luke still remained calm and had the heart to make jokes. Duggan, who stood behind him, couldn't help admiring this calm state of mind. When he thought about what was going to happen next, his legs slightly shook. The time passed by minute, it seemed to go very slowly. Go in. Luke showed the pass issued by the military and entered the parlors of the Venice Palace. Just after he disappeared from Venice Square, a very abrupt shot broke the peace in Rome. Like a boulder crashing into the calm lake, causing unprecedented turmoil. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The ear-piercing whistle blew, and a team of patrolling guards sprang into action while military police quickly surrounded the entire Venice Square in an attempt to find the sniper hiding in the shadows. Another series of gunshots boomed as Kenneth lifted the tarp off the truck. 20 of the mafia's best gunmen emerged from it. This heavy fire caught the patrolling guards of Rome by surprise. Kenneth operated the Maxim heavy machine gun according to Luke's command. A long stream of gunfire swept through the crowd of military police and guards, who fell one after another. For a while, it was difficult to break through this deadly web of interwoven bullets. "Protect the leader!" Luke shouted with excitement and walked out of the parlor without a second thought. At this time, politicians and guards alike couldn't be bothered to distinguish between the enemy and themselves. What's more, Luke is wearing a captain's rank and German military uniform, which was the best pass. The ordinary soldiers didn't dare to stop him, and those senior officers had no extra time to cross-examine and let him walk along the stairs. "Captain, Kenneth won't last long. He can hold it for 5 more minutes at most." Dum-Dum Duggan, who was following closely behind, gulped, feeling surrounded by enemy troops. "That's enough." Luke walked briskly and arrived at Mussolini's office floor with amazing speed. The security here is obviously stricter than the outside, and Nazi soldiers protected the Italian dictator. They wore Hydra armbands and weren't alarmed by the sudden sound of gunfire. On the contrary, Mussolini was closely guarded, even more, maintaining basic order. The Nazi soldier stopped an unfamiliar face like Luke for questioning as soon as he rushed up, even though he held the rank of captain in the Third Reich. "No passage. State your identity." Luke didn't bother to talk and kicked out. The Nazi soldier who intercepted him suffered a broken sternum and flew backward. Before the rest of the group could react, their necks were cleanly snapped. "Create a disturbance and draw fire." Duggan nodded his head when he heard Luke's instructions. He pulled out his pistol and ran further up the stairs while firing a few rounds down the stairs, drawing more guards. Intensive footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Luke strode forward, shouting, "Protect the leader!" And the enemy ran upstairs. As he made his way to Mussolini's conference room, he was fully prepared. The Italian dictator had the habit of having afternoon tea at 2 p.m. every day and liked to stay in the third conference room on the corridor's right-hand side. When the mood strikes, he will call his mistress over to vent some of his unbridled energy. The sound of guns shooting kept coming and going. Like a tiger in a herd of sheep, Luke knocked the Nazi soldiers who tried to stop him to the ground. This time, he didn't hold back. Creators' thoughts. BingeFics. Please support us by reading 20+ privilege chapters on p.a.t.r.e.o.n. Visit patreon.com/binge translations. * monthly 72 chapters for God of Thunder members. 6-chapter mass release every Friday. Link also available in synopsis. Comment. 39 comments. Vote. Chapter 43, Chapter 043, Shocking the Allies, Shaking the World. The sound of guns shooting kept coming and going. Like a tiger in a herd of sheep, Luke knocked the Nazi soldiers who tried to stop him to the ground. This time, he didn't hold back. After all, it still hurts when a submachine gun bullet hits his body. Luke pinched the hard helmet into scrap metal with 5 fingers folded, and the last opponent fell in front of him. Boom! He kicked open the door of the meeting room. A bald man was sitting in the conference room, his eyes full of horror. A German-made Walther 38p pistol was aimed at Luke, who broke in. Bang! 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 3 bullets clearly pierced Luke's German uniform, but no blood flowed out. That's it. Luke took out the flat slug with his hand and grinned with a friendly smile. "Hello, Mr. Mussolini. Who are you? Liberals? Or are you one of those Revolutionary Front guys?" Mussolini looked at Luke with the gaze of looking at a monster. Bullets can't penetrate his skin. Luke didn't answer. He went straight over and picked up the Italian dictator as if he were carrying a chicken. "I'm an Italian." "Pa." With a slap on Mussolini, his face immediately swelled up. This was still the result of Luke's control over his power. "I don't care who you are, Mr. Benito Mussolini. Please face the reality of your capture." With a stern look in his eyes, Luke pushed Mussolini onto the balcony where he often gave his speeches. Gunfire broke out in Venice Square, causing chaos. "We are taking over the city of Rome. From this moment on, there will be no dictators. No fascist." Luke looked down at the crowd below, and his loud voice carried far away. "The sun is shining on his body like a heroic figure from a mythical legend." Telegram. The latest telegram. Allied command in London. The Strategic Science Reserve, which Colonel Phillips sharply reprimanded, was in a gloom state. Everyone didn't even dare to breathe loudly, fearing to provoke the anger of the chief again. At this time, the messenger burst in with great enthusiasm. He was flushed bright red, perhaps too excited, and everything he wanted to say was stuck in his throat. He couldn't spit it out. "It's Captain Cavill's telegram." Afterward, a messenger was short of breath, and his face was full of excitement and admiration. "What's the fuss about? No proper training. Fuck." Colonel Phillips frowned, yelling at him first and then reaching for the telegram. When he saw the content, he couldn't help but burst out with a swear word, completely ignoring the majestic image of being the chief. "Italy, Rome, at 2:50 Central European Time. Captain Luke Cavill led the Howling Commandos to capture Italy and Mussolini alive." A short sentence made Colonel Phillips freeze in place, as if there was a bolt from the blue, exploding in his mind. The impact of this telegram made him suddenly lose his ability to think, and he was silent for a long while. "A success," the colonel muttered to himself. It was he who asked Luke to lead the Howling Commandos. He made a great plan to help the Allies land in Sicily and raid Rome. But he actually did it. Colonel Phillips was in disbelief and felt that he was in a dream, one that was full of delusions. In his plan, the best result was actually to sneak into Italy's hinterland and create opportunities for the Allied forces to land ashore. As for capturing Mussolini alive, it was just a temporary addition. It didn't matter much if it couldn't be done. No one expected Luke would give the Allies and Colonel Phillips such a great surprise. "Super Soldier. Erskine, did you see that? Luke is the best super soldier." Colonel Phillips was so excited that he squeezed the telegram with one hand and pressed the messenger's shoulders with the other. His eyes were a little bit red. "Are you sure that this news is true? If word of this gets out, this matter will boost the Allies' morale. Strategic Science Reserve will no longer be subjected to harsh criticism from many sides. The pressure will not only be reduced, but its status will also rise. Everything will be different." The telegram is from Rome, Italy. Absolutely true. The messenger seemed to be infected, his tone was excited, and his voice trembled. There is also a bulletin from the King of Italy deposing Prime Minister Mussolini. Immediately afterwards, the messenger added, "Hurry, inform headquarters. Notify the President. Notify everyone." Colonel Phillips grabbed the telegram and waved his arm vigorously. He was right about Luke. The whole world should know about this fantastic event. The telegraphers were tapping vigorously, sending bundles of electromagnetic waves, and quickly transmitted to various places. From England to America, from Churchill's office to Roosevelt's White House. The absurd and unbelievable truthful news was like a flying horse with wings running back and forth across the world. Creators' thoughts. BingeFics 20 plus advanced chapters and 72 monthly chapters on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/binge translations. Comment. 42 comments. Vote. Chapter 44, Chapter 044 Soaring Reputation. In Venice Palace's bedchamber, the lights were still bright, and the fluttering candlelight reflected the famous oil paintings and extravagant decorations. Different from the previous banquets, full of the laughter of the upper-class guests. Tonight's Venice Palace was very quiet, shrouded in deathly silence. Rescue leader. Kill the Americans. Long live Italy. Long live the Fuhrer. A few harsh slogans suddenly sounded, accompanied by a burst of fierce gunfire, but quickly calmed down. These kinds of minor disturbances simply didn't arouse any waves. Those fools who are brainwashed by fanatical fascism couldn't really make any waves. Captain, this is the 11th time. Duggan's dark face was full of tension. He hasn't recovered from the successful raid in the afternoon. So far, he couldn't believe it. It was all real. The Italian dictator, the prime minister of a country, Mussolini, who supported the Axis powers and Hitler, unexpectedly became their prisoner. Let other members take turns on duty. The Italian defenders won't attack rashly. Their king is eager to hang Mussolini in the square. Luke kept his composure. Right now, he had Mussolini as a bargaining chip in his hand, and the fascist forces in Rome didn't dare to move. As for the toppled King of Italy and the royal family, they wanted Luke to send Mussolini to the gallows immediately. The king has issued an announcement to depose Prime Minister Mussolini, and the royal family took over the army. 7 gunmen died, and 4 were seriously injured in the raid. The Allied command sent a telegram. The British and the US both want to seize ownership of Italy. The State Department and the Pentagon, the War Department and the Navy Department are all quarreling. Dum-Dum Duggan reported the situation today. Things are going as Luke expected. No matter how the British and Americans argue, this credit belonged to him anyway, and no one could take it away. Luke was excited when he thought of the reputation value that was soaring like a rocket on his character panel. Let them fight to their heart's content. Rome and Mussolini are the chips in our hands. We will sell them to whoever offers the highest price. Luke smiled, he had already made a plan. This isn't a military operation but an armed kidnapping. When Mussolini fell into his hands, he accomplished the mission. All that remains is a political game between the rising bald eagle and the weakening John Bull. However, these complicated intrigues have nothing to do with Luke himself, and he wasn't interested. Luke wants a Medal of Honor that belonged to a war hero and a massive amount of reputation. Italians have a good attitude. The king is a wise man. He immediately ousted Mussolini and ignored Venice Palace's occupation because they wanted to show goodwill to the Allies. Luke saw clearly that howling commandos alone wouldn't be able to stop the Roman garrison. However, there weren't as many fascist forces loyal to Mussolini and Axis countries as imagined. This is Luke's reason for staying in the Venice Palace. Behind him are the Allied troops who had already landed in Sicily. Everything is as you said. Duggan sincerely admired it. Even though he won a fantastic victory, the Howling Commando's young captain wasn't carried away and remained unfazed and calm. However, who are we going to sell Italy to? Duggan asked again. His voice trembled slightly because Luke's thoughts directly determined the future of the Howling Commandos. We, of course, are giving President Roosevelt this critical chip. Luke didn't take long to think about it and quickly gave his answer. The most re-elected president in the history of the United States of America was a powerful and flexible person to work with. Moreover, the president sitting in the White House needs an outstanding contribution from luck to shut up the public's mouth. After all, no one can deny that Roosevelt did play tricks in the presidential campaign and deceived all the voters. If they get the credit for capturing Italy, the other side will surely be grateful for the goodwill Luke passed on. It looks like tomorrow Allied Command will be able to send someone to take over. Duggan nodded. Now, he listened to Luke's every word. One victory after another has established the young captain's authority in the team. Who would have thought that an unknown six-member team would have made this fantastic and legendary achievement? Send a telegram to the White House and wait for the president's message. Luke ordered it down. From the moment Duggan sent the telegram of victory to Allied Command, the reputation refresh notifications didn't stop. Side quest, Flowers and Glory, the war hero's second step. Completed. Requirements, reputation value reached 8,000 points. Achieved. Reward, Bane skill card, back-breaking expert, obtained. Luke crossed off the completed task but didn't expect the second one to pop up right away. Side quests, legendary name, the war hero's third step. Completed. Requirements, reputation value reached 20,000 points. Achieved. Reward, one chance to draw Superman card, obtained. Then, the third task, the fourth. Luke tilted his head and looked up at the deep night sky, revealing a satisfied smile. He was about to draw a new Superman card. Binge/advert, support us through patro.n by reading 20 chapters in advance. We will have a 7 chapters mass release on Friday, on Patro.n. And another surprise for you on patro.n, but we'll keep it a secret for now. Visit patron.com/binge translations. Comment. 54 comments. Vote. Chapter 45, Chapter 045 Rewards, New Mission. To Luke's surprise, the quest completion notice kept popping up. One by one, the rewards gave off a soft light in the item column. This time, he led a team to raid Rome and captured Mussolini alive in an armed operation. He initially expected to receive over 400,000 reputation points. According to the development of the events and the publicity efforts at a later period, breaking the million cap shouldn't be a problem. It was foreseeable that when Luke's name spread around the world and was regarded as a legendary figure of the Allied forces, his reputation would welcome a surge. Luke preferred this efficient method rather than toiling to complete quests and slowly accumulate reputation values. What a bountiful harvest! He thought to himself. When he opens the shop in the future, he will exchange skill cards and props without worry. This thought made him a little happy. Anyway, there are quest rewards. Luke's mind drifted. All of the 5 War Hero series of side quests were completed. In addition to the Scarecrow's Fear Gas Bane's back-breaking expert skill card, and Superman card lucky draw opportunity, Poison Ivy's Phenomenon Perfume Joker's Laughing Gas and Constantine's Silk Cut cigarettes were also provided as quest rewards. Generally speaking, the most valuable thing was undoubtedly the lucky draw opportunity. One can be randomly selected from numerous Superman cards as a reward. In the past life, Luke felt that he had a great chance of winning Silver Age Superman and Superboy Prime. When that happens, not to mention Thanos, the director of the Universal Family Planning Commission, even Odin, the All-Father, or Thor, who had opened his Rune King form, would tremble. However, the latter rewards had more trolling effects than actual use. Poison ivy's pheromone perfume can increase one's attractiveness to the opposite sex. Note, the effect is better between people of the same sex. This is aphrodisiac perfume. Luke looked speechless. What can I do with this? As for Joker's laughing gas and Constantine's silk-cut cigarette, the former is laughing until the muscles convulse and twitching all over. Taking too much will quickly lead to death. The latter is just a tiny amount of nicotine for your lungs. It will bring you a little closer to lung cancer. After browsing the quest rewards, Luke opened the character panel, and the data had changed. Host, Luke Cavill. Loaded card, Superman, LV1. Abilities, Stellar Energy, passive, Bioforce Field, passive. Reputation, 451,024. Task list, open the Path of Heroes, side quests. Completed. Achievement, Legendary Hero. Lines of information appeared on his retina. Luke's mind moved slightly, sweeping over it. Your name will be written in the history books and passed down for centuries, enhancing the host's leadership and influence. Not bad. Luke, who saw the results, was delighted. This hidden aura of charisma sometimes played an unexpectedly crucial role. The lucky draw, this kind of thing should be done on an auspicious day with good background music. Otherwise, it won't feel right. Luke thought for a moment and decided to save the lucky draw for the day when the president presented the medal. Borrowing the president's good luck, this would be a home run. With a beautiful thought, Luke walked into the washroom. Instead of lying down in the vast and luxurious hot spring bath, he simply washed his muscular body with cold water. Blocks of well-defined muscles, like hard rocks, revealed his masculinity. His whole body seemed to be carved out of marble, majestic and fit. Explosive power filled within. Sure enough, my eyes feel sour. Luke sighed as he braced his hands against the wall. He closed his eyes, giving up trying to use heat vision. According to the setting, the stellar energy Superman absorbed typically was stored in the billion-trillion cells in his body and could be released through his eyes when necessary. From burning up a planet to sealing a wound, it all depended on the user's control and the energy in the body. Maybe Luke hadn't loaded the card long enough, and he hadn't absorbed enough astral energy. It was hard for him to draw heat into his eyes as Superman did. However, when he thought about it carefully, Clark Kent seemed to have learned this trick only after becoming an adult. Luke's heart felt a little more satisfied. 10 minutes later, Luke, who was recognized as a conqueror by Italy and declared a legendary hero by the Allies, came out wearing a white bathrobe. When he saw the medieval sword hanging on the wall, he couldn't help but think about testing it. Mussolini hit him in the chest with a 9mm bullet without causing any harm. He wondered if this medieval sword, an overwhelming metal squeal followed by its sharp edge flashing with cold light, could break his skin. Luke took it off and slashed it hard at his arm. Clank. The sound of metal clashing and bending echoed. The intricately carved medieval sword collided with Luke's bulging muscles, emitting a crisp sound of metal crashing. An overwhelming metal squeal followed this, and with a screech sound, the well-crafted medieval sword broke apart. On Luke's bulging arm muscles, there was only a superficial scratch that recovered instantly. Even under the wave of his mighty power, the medieval sword didn't cause any damage. It seems that no one can stop me in the battlefields of World War II. Luke leaned against the bed and picked up the book Il Principe written by Italian thinker Niccolò Machiavelli. Unfortunately, Mussolini didn't learn how to turn Italy into a powerful centralized country but advocated totalitarianism and became a dictator who everyone wanted to shout at and beat up. Main quest, opening of the third camp, Hellfire Club. Requirements, extract mutant gene fragments, 0/5. Completing this quest will complete the prerequisite for opening the Celestials event. Reward, Leech Serum 5. A few lines of information suddenly appeared in front of Luke's eyes. He still kept reading, but his auditory senses were at the maximum, scanning the whole bedroom like radar. Generally speaking, the quest will start only after contacting important plot characters or getting information on crucial plots. Luke is the only one in the large bedroom, yet he received a quest reminder. There was no doubt that there's a mutant in the same room with him. Binge/advert, support us through patreon.n by reading 20 chapters in advance. We will have a 7 chapters mass release tomorrow morning, it's midnight for me, on Patreon. And another surprise for you on patreon.n, but we'll keep it a secret for now. Visit patreon.com/binge translations. Comment. 52 comments. Vote. Chapter 46, Chapter 046 Mutants. Hellfire Club. Luke knew this organization. Its establishment could be traced back to the 18th century. It mainly recorded and investigated some mysterious events, such as vampires, werewolves, and witches. Later, it gradually became a social place for elites from all walks of life, especially inviting famous scientists and influential rich and famous people. On the whole, Hellfire Club at this stage was quite normal. It was not until a German scientist named Sebastian Shaw joined that it became a premier organization for exceptional people, mutants. However, the Hellfire Club occasionally invited the world's top people. For example, Howard Stark, who later presided over SHIELD and took Stark Industries to greater heights. "You've been hiding there for so long, aren't you going to come out?" Luke put down his book, his right hand clenched into a fist, his muscles tense, and apparent traces of a vein emerged. Boom! His fist swung at the air. The air seemed to be squeezed by a heavy force, and a sound of a shocking explosion erupted. Visible to the naked eye, the air rippled like a cannonball shot, tons of terrifying power poured out. Outside the bedroom, the open-air balcony was suddenly torn apart. Rubble went flying. A transparent figure was lifted off by the aftershock and smashed heavily against the wall, spitting out a mouthful of blood. "You're a mutant too?" Hearing this question, Luke chuckled and shook his head, saying, "Not everyone who shows something special is your compatriot, standing in your side. Do you know the existence of mutants?" At the corner, a thin man with a black scar on his face stood up and stared at Luke with his cold eyes. That punch formed a booming wave of air, like a solid cannonball smashing out. The mere aftermath of the wave lifted him off the ground. In terms of physical strength alone, the skinny man had never seen a more terrible existence than this allied captain. "I'm curious, who sent you?" "Sebastian Shaw." Luke didn't answer the other's questions but threw out a name. Sebastian Shaw, the Black King of the Hellfire Club, had the powerful ability to absorb energy and turn it to his advantage. If the skinny man came from Hellfire Club, he was sure to have heard of this name. "Do you know Mr. Shaw?" "Well, Captain Cavill, it doesn't matter how much you know about mutants. The thin man smiled coldly, and his figure abruptly became distorted and blurred. Like putting on a layer of optical camouflage cloak, he disappeared instantly. The luxurious bedroom was so quiet that one could hear a needle falling on the ground. Luke stood expressionlessly. His white bathrobe opened, revealing his solid muscles. He wasn't surprised that mutants would appear in World War II. According to the timeline, the leader of one of the two future mutant camps, Magneto, who founded the Brotherhood, should still be a child, still imprisoned in the dreadful Auschwitz concentration camp. Young Magneto once met a crazy Nazi scientist, Sebastian Shaw, who later became the Black King. This person firmly believed in the Aryan master race theory concocted by SS leader Hitler. He agreed with Hitler's extremist approach of cleaning up the inferior race and creating a superior race. After returning from studying in Britain, Shaw, who specialized in genetic engineering, was quickly recruited into the German army's scientific department. As his talent gradually reveals itself, he slowly gains importance and gets involved in managing concentration camp projects, becoming a ruthless scientific butcher. All the imprisoned Jews were Sebastian Shaw's living experiment subjects. He tried to study the human genetic code's profound meaning and thus find the key to unlock the evolution gates. It was one day in 1944 that changed Sebastian Shaw's fate. On a rainy afternoon, as usual, he stood by the window with his coffee. He watched the Jews and Polish people being herded into camps like cattle. A young boy attracted Sebastian Shaw's attention. He watched with his own eyes as the other party cried out in anger while using both his hands to twist an iron gate from a distance. Several strong soldiers couldn't stop it. Sebastian felt like he had found the key to unlocking the door to human evolution. Later, he did learn that there is a superior race of people on Earth, superior to human beings, unique to the Germanic race. They were called mutants. The name came from an American dwarf scientist. When Sebastian Shaw was studying in England, he had read the papers written by the other party. The dwarf scientist firmly believed that many people in the world were more potent and more talented than human beings. So, Sebastian Shaw launched a series of studies on the still young Magneto and finally discovered the mystery of the mutant's ability. The X gene. A string of divine secret codes that seem to be implanted in the human body by the gods. The Hellfire Club mutants came in to rescue Mussolini. It seems that Hydra had finally noticed me. Comment. 27 comments. Vote. Chapter 47, Chapter 047 Superman's suit makes its debut. Extra chapter for reaching the hidden Power Stone goal. Luke collected his thoughts with a playful look in his eyes. The invisible thin man moved carefully, with his natural ability to distort light, change skin color, and blend in with his surroundings. No matter how powerful you are, you need to find me first. I was just careless before. The thin man nicknamed Chameleon pulled out a sharp dagger. He felt that Luke discovered his existence solely because of a random coincidence. I've infiltrated so many military sites, stolen intelligence, assassinated dignitaries, and never made a mistake. The thin man's eyes looked cold, like a viper that eats people. He quietly approached Luke, ready to slice his throat. Go to hell. The thin man moved like a cat on the soft carpet, leaving no trace. He held his breath, not making a sound. The dagger in his hand flung out and stabbed Luke, who was still standing still. You can hide your steps and your breath, but you can't hide your heartbeat, even if it's faint. Luke sneered, and his body shifted slightly. The dagger stabbed his chest, emitting the clank sound of metal colliding. The sharp dagger made of carbon steel couldn't pierce Luke's skin, only leaving a shallow scar. It soon recovered. The force that bounced back made his arm numb. How is this possible? The skinny man exclaimed. It's a pity he didn't see the fantastic scene of Luke testing his defense with a medieval sword. Otherwise, he would never have thought that he could kill his opponent with a dagger. Crack! Luke smiled, raised his hand, and twisted off the carbon alloy dagger. He then lifted the thin man effortless. Tell me what I want to know. I might let you live. The other side obviously looked gentle, but his voice was like the Siberian air, making people shiver. Meeting those cold eyes, the thin man's mouth opened and closed in fear, wanting to say everything he knew. The sound of gunfire from a submachine gun reached Luke's ears. He could tell that the sound came from the direction of the dungeons. It seems that you have companions. I'm sorry, you're useless now. Luke casually threw the skinny man off the destroyed balcony as if he was a sandbag. Accompanied by a shrill cry, the mutant trailed a graceful arc in the air. A few moments later, the dull sound of a heavy object hitting the ground could be heard. Let's see what mutants look like here. There was a smile on the corners of Luke's mouth, and his thoughts moved slightly, wear the suit. To protect himself, he still chose to wear the Kryptonian uniform he got for free, which could increase his defenses a little bit. Who knew what kinds of mutants there were? What if his opponent had laser vision, which is even more potent than heat vision? This Superman is obviously powerful but overly cautious. Luke complained. A bit of light spread out. A steel armor-like nanosuit covered his tall body. It didn't have the S of Superman on his chest, which is the L family's unique symbol. In its place, there was a golden emblem shaped like a dazzling sun. The dark red cloak behind him resembled a fluttering flag. Although the cloak has no practicality, looking fabulous is a lifelong thing. Looking at the tall and upright figure reflected in the mirror, Luke sighed. Fortunately, it wasn't the awkward Golden Age look with the underwear. Otherwise, he wouldn't have worn his suit. Opening the tall, heavy doors of the bedroom casually, from below the quiet Venice Palace, he could hear the sound of fierce gunfire. In the dungeon's Venice Palace, the Howling Commandos are facing an unprecedented battle. On the battlefield, their opponents were Nazi soldiers, armored troops, and heavily armed Axis forces. And now, their enemy was an anomaly, a monster that couldn't be perceived with common sense. In the tunnel of the dungeon, a sturdy man nearly 2 meters tall stood. His whole body is covered in steel-like skin, reflecting a silvery glow. A bullet storm swept through, only to send sparks across his body. Kenneth, shove that fucking magazine over here. With a fierce look on his face, Duggan threw away the empty magazine of his submachine gun. That damn Iron Man, at most, will only be hit back a few steps by the momentum of the bullets. If they wanted to deal some damage on him, they had to use something more powerful. Moreover, in addition to the Steel Man, there's a red-skinned and slender-tailed, devil-like monster. He can appear out of thin air like a ghost and then disappear quickly. Those Mafia gunmen who kept outside the dungeons were taken to the sky by the Red Devil. Then they were let go, thrown down. The sound of the human bodies falling was like a bag full of water hitting the ground. Hitting hard with a muffled bang. Bone, flesh, and blood were stirred into a sludge-like mass that made people want to vomit. In addition to these two terrifying intruders, there's a woman in leather who releases toxins and a dozen strengthened fighters wearing Hydra armbands. They sneaked into Venice Palace by diving in low altitude. The 20 elite gunmen recruited by the Mafia were no match for these anomalies. If not for the terrain's advantage, the narrow tunnel would only allow 2 people to walk side by side. The Howling Commandos used fierce firepower to form a bullet storm. Fearfully, they might have already been wiped out by the group long ago. There's no way to inform the captain. Captain Cavill may not be able to fight against these people. Mainelli's face looked grave. Unless a fully armed and armored unit is mobilized, covering a large area with firepower, it won't be possible to kill these abnormal people with their abilities. Shout out to Solomon_Born. Thank you for your support. Binge advert. We did a 7-chapter mass release on ******* today. Now you can get access to 25+ chapters ahead of the web novel release. Also, I have a special surprise ready for the ****** readers. Visit us, patreon.com/binge translations. Comment. 52 comments. Vote. Chapter 48, Chapter 048 Superman's suit makes its debut, 2, and Azazel. At least the Prime Minister is going with us to the grave. Sniper Jimmy turned to look at Mussolini in the dungeon and smiled. A large caliber bullet was shot from the muzzle of his gun. The penetrating force that could have lifted the enemy's skull hit the burly man with steel-like muscles, instantly making a big hole. But despairingly, the outer metal filled the puncture wound like melted liquid. In just a few breaths, the sturdy body with a silvery luster was restored. I thought the captain was enough of a monster, and I didn't think this world was this crazy. Mainelli smiled bitterly. He was like the Germans who saw tanks for the first time in the Battle of Somme in World War I. Faced with such a steel monster, human beings had no chance of victory, and it was even more challenging to have the courage to fight it. Kill Mussolini when necessary. Never let them succeed. Duggan grabbed a submachine gun and went on another shooting spree. Unfortunately, it didn't cause any damage. At most, it formed some insignificant disturbance. Tied up in the back and locked in a dungeon, Mussolini had a happy expression. He knew that Hitler, who was far away in Berlin, Germany, had been conducting superhuman research. He just didn't know the specifics. He never thought there would be such talented people in the Axis powers. Wait, something is going on outside. Duggan, nicknamed Dum Dum, is ready to die for his country. The Howling Commandos were veterans who have fought many battles, so naturally, they weren't afraid to die. It's a shame that they died in a foreign country when they were about to be honored by the president as war heroes, with flowers and glory. Boom! A loud noise. When the members of the Howling Commandos were ready to die in sacrifice, the earth-shattering sound, like cannon fire, echoed through the dungeon. A rustle of dust fell from the bricks' cracks and filled the tunnel, causing Duggan to cough. Outside the dungeon, it was as if a giant beast was walking. Every step it took would trigger an alarming commotion. What's going on? The steel man at the front turned his head and asked. Did the Allies drive their tanks into the Venice Palace? Boom! The earth trembled, and it seemed like a hurricane was rolling outside. A strengthened warrior wearing a Hydra armband flew into the thick wall in a blur. The bricks shattered, and debris flew. Flesh and blood of the strengthened warriors injected with the defective serum looked like they had been put into a juicer. They were crushed and smashed an instant, painting a scarlet and harsh abstract picture. The whole scene looked as if a tomato was thrown hard at the wall. Immediately afterward, the second, the third. One by one, the strengthened fighters who were guarding the dungeon's exterior were smashed through the hole in the wall. The violent painting smeared with flesh and blood is getting brighter and brighter. Is that the Allied captain? It looks like chameleon mist. Useless piece of shit. The devil with red skin and a long slender tail rolled his eyes and spoke with contempt. His name is Azazel, nicknamed Satan, and he is also a member of the Hellfire Club, one of Sebastian Shaw's men. I'm going to handle the guy outside. You guys take Mussolini back. He's the one the Führer in Berlin asked for by name. The Satan, Azazel, hummed softly. As a mutant, he had always been pretentious and despised ordinary human beings. Most of the mutants who join the Hellfire Club have been discriminated against and hurt by other people, so they were easily brainwashed by Sebastian Shaw's set of racial theory. They believed in the radical statement that mutants are the future and humans are the lower class. Mutants were superior to humans. Ironically, the leader of this group, Sebastian Shaw, wasn't a mutant at all. That crazy Nazi scientist only activated the recessive X gene in his body through organ transplantation, thus gaining abilities. Strictly speaking, Sebastian Shaw isn't a mutant. At most, he's a modified human who stole mutant powers. The red figure, like a wisp of smoke, abruptly dissipated. Then, he appeared in front of Luke. That chameleon's ability, although... Boom! Before Satan Azazel could finish his words, a powerful punch was thrown. The turbulent airflow, like an empty wave, rolled up the dust. Such a frightening sound, Azazel quickly shut his mouth. His body instantly disappeared and moved to a distance. Is this guy a mutant? Looking at the crumbling ground where the compressed airflow had blown a big hole, the Satan, Azazel had palpitations. He asked the same question as to the chameleon. In this era, the understanding of superpowered people is still limited to mutants. You're the Superman who captured Mussolini alive and conquered Italy? Azazel asked with a sneer. Superman? There was a look of surprise in Luke's eyes. When had he ever been called that? You're the Super Soldier from the Allies. The world is buzzing with the legendary story of you leading a team that infiltrated the city of Rome, conquered Italy, and captured the dictator alive. Roosevelt and Churchill said that you have the powers beyond those mere mortals and create amazing miracles that no one could imagine. Azazel appeared to be a bit disdainful, lightly snorted, and said, Now the Allies are calling you Superman, saying that you will lead the Allies to victory. Luke couldn't help but laugh in his heart after hearing this. He didn't expect that he got the title by mistake. Superman of the Marvel world. Now this was exciting. Binge/note. Hidden target reached. Here was the extra chapter. An original fanfic launching tonight. Be prepared at midnight GMT +8, 7 hours from now. Discord server also launching tonight. Shout out to our patron Corey Sharp 94. Thank you for incredible your support. Creators' thoughts. BingeFics. Wanna read ahead? Become our patron. Visit ****.com/binge translations. Get access to 25 advanced chapters and 72 monthly chapters, while also supporting our work. Comment. 38 comments. Vote. Chapter 49, Chapter 049, Superman vs. Azazel. Thank you for your kind words, but that's the end of the farce for tonight. Luke put away his smile and looked cold. Then, he suddenly rushed out. The hard ground opened up with fine cracks, like spider webs. The dark red cloak was lifted, and in less than a second, Luke arrived in front of Azazel. The tall body was like a wall, crushing straight forward. The terrifying wind pressure emitted a hissing whistle. Too fast. With Azazel's reaction speed, it would have been impossible for him to dodge. But with an alert sense of danger, the red figure dissipated like smoke, avoiding Luke's head-on charge. When did such monsters appear in the Allied forces? Azazel moved to a higher altitude. Then he flickered several times, pulling away by a considerable distance. It seems that this is the only way for him to regain a sense of security. Like a humanoid Tyrannosaurus Rex, Luke left a deep impression on the Azazel. The other side just waved his fist. With his bulging muscles, it could cause the air pressure to roar. This shows how terrifying his physical strength was. Unless it's Mr. Shaw. Otherwise, it would be impossible to block the power of the punch head-on. Azazel made a judgment. His long, slender tail curled around a sharp dagger, and his eyes flashed with a hint of murderous intent. As long as it's human, there will always be a weakness. The Allied captain doesn't look like a mutant, otherwise, he would have reacted emotionally to seeing himself. There's nothing to be afraid of if I'm careful to avoid his fists. Azazel looked at Luke, who was looking at him with cold eyes, and he inexplicably developed an inflated sense of I can do it and I'm good. With a few quick instantaneous moves, he got closer to the Allied captain. The sharp inverted triangle tail was like another arm extended from his body. It didn't only maintain good balance but could also handle weapons flexibly. A sharp dagger stabbed Luke in the back of the head. "You're too slow." Luke heard the wind whistling behind him and spoke with a cold expression. His right leg flew like an iron whip, twisting the air around it, kicking Azazel in the head. Before he could come near, Azazel could feel the strong wind. As if a gigantic wave was rolling through, the momentum was unbelievable. The air was like a barrel of gunpowder being ignited, emitting an explosive boom. Satan smiled smugly and disappeared, letting the terrifying whip-like kick fall short. This is just a feint to get Luke's attention. After the smoke condensed and flashed twice, Azazel suddenly appeared. The sharp dagger with the tail curling around it jabbed straight at Luke's neck. "As I said, you're too slow." Luke's eyes flickered slightly, and he turned his head. His left solid arm directly flew over. Ding ding. The sharp dagger poked his neck but rebounded violently. While Azazel was stuck, Luke grabbed his slender tail. With a strong pull, Azazel couldn't resist and was pulled over. Luke pulled the tail with his left hand and punched with his right, sending an uppercut straight at his chin. When the uppercut made contact with Satan's chin, Azazel felt a loud buzz in his head. It was like a dull thunderbolt that struck directly into the skull. After a sharp pain, the whole person lost consciousness. If Azazel could see himself, he would cry out and think of plastic surgery. His jawline was crushed and cracked, half of his face looked like it had been blown up like a gunpowder barrel, all his teeth had fallen out, his cheeks were torn through, and you could barely see his original appearance. The blood that covered his face was like an open faucet, flowing out in a torrent. This miraculous amount of bleeding made people wonder if he would die outright due to excessive blood loss. Frankly speaking, Azazel is still alive because of his strong physique and a certain degree of healing ability. "This is only 30% of my power," Luke said gently. And then he pulled the tail again and pulled back Azazel, who had fallen to the ground. As if he was a flying insect entangled in a spider's thread, the deficient mutant fell into Luke's hands. His 5 fingers folded, like iron tongs, gripping Azazel's neck. So much for mutants. Hearing Luke's comment, out of mutant pride, Satan instinctively wanted to refute a few words. However, he felt that the hand gripping his neck was gradually tightening. A suffocating pressure forced him to shut up. Falling into the clutches of this allied captain, for the first time, Azazel felt that life was so fragile. As long as Luke squeezed a little more harder, he would finally say goodbye to this world. Not to mention escaping with teleportation. Right now, Azazel didn't even dare to think of moving for fear of provoking the other's murderous heart. It's not bad. Luke picked up Azazel like a dead dog and strode to the dungeon. The battle outside had long attracted the attention of other mutants. However, they didn't think any terrible opponent could threaten the shadowy and ghostly Azazel. These mutants in World War II haven't seen superheroes that sprang up in later generations. They naturally had a shallow vision, thinking that they were the future rules of the world. If they were brilliant, they wouldn't be brainwashed by Sebastian Shaw. Azazel. The leather-clad woman who was releasing poisons, couldn't help but exclaim when she saw Azazel. With a slight lift of her hand, a mass of green fog gushed over. The leather-clad woman's ability was to release nerve gas, causing a wide range of indiscriminate lethal attacks. The howling commandos in the tunnel wouldn't have lasted so long if it had not been for Mussolini's survival. Not a good idea. Luke's expression was unchanged and unafraid. With one step, the ground shook. His upright figure closed in on the leather-clad woman in an instant. The green smoke was blown away by a surge of air before it got close. A hand slashed lightly hit her neck. The opponent's neck immediately slacked as if it had been broken. Both eyes went dull and fell straight down. The battle ended faster than anyone could have imagined.